electronic meeting of the City Council. We are meeting electronically due to the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic in accordance with the Governor Sununu's Emergency Order Number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04. Please note that in accordance with the Governor's Emergency Order, we have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing this meeting. Instructions are provided on our agenda on the City of Concord's website at concordnh.legstar.com/calendar.aspx. We're utilizing the Zoom platform for this electronic meeting. All members of the City Council have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting, and the public has access to listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting through clicking on the following website address: us02web.zoom.us/j/894-259-18333. If any member of the public does not have website access, they may dial the telephone number of 1-929-205-6099. If dialing from a landline, you may call the toll-free at 877-853-5257. The webinar ID number is 894-2591-8333. For those of you who want to provide public testimony in the public hearing portion of the meeting, and you are connected to the Zoom website, you may click on the hand raise icon in the attendees section and make the request. When the time is appropriate, you'll be recognized by me and you can provide your testimony. For the members of the public who are participating by phone, you may dial *9 to alert me that you want to testify. We will not be using the chat function in the Zoom for this meeting. Please note that testimony is only allowed for agenda items that have been scheduled for a public hearing, and public participation is not authorized for other items on the agenda. If anyone has problems accessing the meeting, please call 603-230-4619 or send an email to citycouncilmeeting@concordnh.gov. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, we will adjourn the meeting and have it rescheduled at that time. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking roll call attendance, and when you state your presence at the meeting, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required in the Right to Know law. Madam Clerk, if you could please call the roll.
Absolutely. Councilor Bouchard.
I'm here, and there's no one in the room with me.
Mayor Boulay.
I am at my office. I am by myself.
Councilor Champlin.
I am present and I am in a room by myself.
Councilor Fennessy.
I am here. I am at my house in a room by myself.
Councilor Grady Sexton.
I am present in my home in a room by myself.
Councilor Hatfield.
I'm here at home in a room by myself.
Councilor Keach.
Present, home alone.
Councilor Kennison.
I am in my home. I'm here, and I'm alone.
Councilor Kretovic.
I'm here in a room by myself.
Councilor Mattson.
I am here at my home alone.
Councilor Nyan.
Present by myself.
Councilor Pierce.
Present and home in this room alone.
Councilor Rice Hawkins.
Here in this room in my house alone.
Councilor Todd.
Here at home alone in this room.
And Councilor Werner.
I'm here at home alone.
Thank you very much. If you could all unmute yourself and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag, of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. Thank you very much. So with that, can we get a motion to seal the minutes from the non-public session?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to seal the minutes from non-public session. Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll, please.
Councilor Bouchard.
Yes.
Mayor Boulay.
Yes.
Councilor Champlin.
Yes.
Councilor Fennessy.
I'm going to abstain.
Councilor Grady Sexton.
Yes.
Councilor Hatfield.
Yes.
Councilor Keach.
Yes.
Counselor Kennison,
Yes.
Counselor Kretovic,
Yes.
Counselor Matson,
Yes.
Counselor Nyan,
Yes.
Counselor Pierce,
Yes.
Counselor Rice Hawkins,
Yes.
Counselor Todd,
Yes.
and Counselor Werner.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, motion is adopted. Just one last reminder for the public, if you have any questions or any trouble accessing the meeting, please call 603-230 or send an email to citycouncilmeeting@concordnh.gov. So with that, we have the minutes of July 13th, 2020 before us. Is there a motion on the minutes? Approval of minutes?
Approval.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the minutes. Is there any comments, concerns, changes? Seeing none, I'm ready for the vote. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll, please?
Counselor Bouchard,
Yes.
Mayor Boulay,
Yes.
Counselor Champlin,
Yes.
Counselor Fennessy,
Yes.
Counselor Grady Sexton,
Yes.
Counselor Hatfield,
Yes.
Counselor Keach,
Yes.
Counselor Kennison,
Yes.
Counselor Kretovic,
Yes.
Counselor Matson,
Yes.
Counselor Nyan,
Yes.
Counselor Pierce,
Yes.
Counselor Rice Hawkins,
Yes.
Counselor Todd,
Yes.
and Counselor Werner.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And the minutes for July 13th are adopted. That brings us to our consent agenda. I would just note two things before I ask for a motion. First is item number 18 has been pulled from consent and is moved to later in the agenda. And I will not be voting on setting a public hearing for item 13 relating to fireworks, as my office has a client. Is there anything else somebody wants to comments regarding the consent agenda? Okay, can we get a motion on the consent agenda with those two items?
Approval.
Motion made and seconded to approve the consent agenda. With noting that 18th has been pulled and I am recusing myself from item 13. Madam Clerk, if you call the roll, please.
Counselor Bouchard,
Yes.
Mayor Boulay,
Yes.
Counselor Champlin,
Yes.
Counselor Fennessy,
Yes.
Counselor Grady Sexton,
Yes.
Counselor Hatfield,
Yes.
Counselor Keach,
Yes.
Counselor Kennison,
Yes.
Counselor Kretovic,
Yes.
Counselor Matson,
Yes.
Counselor Nyan,
Yes.
Counselor Pierce,
Yes.
Counselor Rice Hawkins,
Yes.
Counselor Todd,
Yes.
and Counselor Werner.
Yes.
And with that, the consent agenda is adopted. Madam Clerk, that takes us to our public hearings. Item 27A is first. Would you be willing to read that, please?
Yes, it's an ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances, Title 4 Zoning Code, Chapter 28 Zoning Ordinance, Article 28-2 Zoning Districts and Allowable Uses, Section 28-2-4 Allowable Principal Uses, and Article 28-5 Supplemental Standards, Section 28-5-17 Certain Uses in Opportunity Corridor Performance District, and Article 28-7 Access, Circulation, Parking, and Loading, Section 28-7-4 Requirements for Stacking Spaces for Drive-Through Facilities.
Thank you very much. Mr. Manager.
Governor, members of the council, City Planner Heather Shank has a presentation.
Okay.
Here to answer any questions that you may have about my report. There were several meetings with staff, with planning board, and with the petitioner to discuss the options for these amendments. And the report essentially summarizes the discussions and the options. And what the planning board ended up recommending to council was to allow drive-through restaurants in the Opportunity Corridor Performance District, and to allow a reduction in the required number of stacking spaces through a conditional use permit with the board. That's a very brief, succinct summary of essentially what planning board is recommending that council do.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Good evening, by the way. And who has questions for the director? We have Councilor Kennison.
Thank you. As I'm reading at the end of this report, a recommendation to allow this to happen, and as it would bring in additional tax revenue to the city, I'd be curious as to how much tax revenue would be coming to the city by this particular development.
I think that's a great question. We looked into it and we did some research on it. And we found we actually tried to do a comparison of different types of development and the tax revenue, and found that there were just too many factors. It was just too complicated to sort of come up with that. I think it could be a great question for the petitioner, and they must have some of those numbers when they were determining what they would like to propose. So unfortunately, the closest we could come up to is the more you put on there, the more it's going to generate. And if you don't put anything there, it's not going to do anything. So very general and sort of unhelpful answer. So I apologize for that.
Can I ask a further question, Your Honor?
Please.
As I read the report, I had a lot of concerns since this had been through doesn't comport with the master plan. It's been through zoning, planning, with a lot of comments that were negative. And as I read it, like 90% of the report cites reasons that it's not a good idea or in the best interest of the city's long term. And then the report takes a bit of a turn at the end. And as I read it, it seems like a rather weak argument to support this. So I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but it was confusing to me to see all of the negatives and then a twist at the end.
So in explanation of that, I guess I'll say that I think what it comes down to is, and it's a question that I have, I don't know the answer either. Can this proposal function as a sort of stepping stone or gateway to eventual implementation of the master plan goals? Or is it simply going to set a precedent saying, hey, we anticipate this kind of low density drive-through type development through the rest of Store Street corridor, which we're going to be expanding, or, extending eventually into areas where we're amalgamating properties for future new development. There's a lot of potential for Store Street, and we definitely want to make the most of it. And I think I think the planning board looked at the proposal and they felt, yes, this is a good option to move in that direction. It certainly seemed like a better option than potentially doing nothing there for another almost 2 decades, as the applicant saying, the petitioner saying, we won't be able to do anything because of these leases that we're not allowed to go up more than 1 story. So if that's the case, then it's difficult. It may not be exactly what we wanted, but it might be the best we can get for another 2 decades.
That's it.
Can I follow up, Your Honor?
Sure, please.
If I can remember what it was I was going to say, that'd be great.
I'll tell you what, let me recognize Councilor Pearson. We can come back to you if you think of it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Kennison, as the representative from the council to the planning board, I think you gleaned from this report just what we were going through. Speaking for myself, I was not entirely in favor of this when it began. When the presentation came forth, I thought the applicants presented a very good presentation. It was in line with what we saw, but I think one of the comments that I had in the report was, it'd be a shame to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So what I think turned my decision, and it was a unanimous vote on the planning board, was that there was really nothing that could be done down there, as Ms. Shank mentioned, until 2035 because of the leases and blocking views of the shopping center. So I think that was a key point to this. Is it exactly what we would love to see as a second Main Street? No, but I think it's a great start in time, and that was the position of the planning board to, again, get something rather than wait 15 years for nothing. I hope that helps you understand how it turned.
I remember what I was going to ask now. In terms of precedent, how does that affect the possibility of other projects coming forward with similar plans in the area?
Are you asking about drive-throughs, specifically about future drive-throughs?
Yeah.
Okay, so this was a concern of ours as well. However, this amendment does not allow any vehicle access lanes or parking or drive-through lanes between the building and the street, which is a significant aspect of what is most negative about this type of development. We also, in our existing code, don't allow drive aisles to be certain distances apart. I believe on this street, on Store Street, because of its classification, it's like 200 feet. So you can't have curb cuts. You need 200 feet between curb cuts unless you get a conditional use permit from the planning board. So we have the tools to some degree to prevent some of the worst adverse impacts of drive-throughs and what they can do to urban fabric and infrastructure. So yes, it opens the door for other people, for other properties to do drive-throughs. But the hope is that the design standards that are sort of built in there will prevent, more negative products, more negative outcomes. And that just comes down to the ZBA not giving variances and the planning board not giving conditional use permits for those aspects that would allow, for instance, like something that has very high traffic volumes and isn't really compatible with downtown urban fabric.
Thank you. Councilor Kennison, you all set? Okay. Councilor Hatfield.
Thank you. Councilor Pierce, I think you just said that that you were persuaded to support this because nothing else could be done during that period where they're locked into leases. But is it that nothing could be done, or just that a drive-through couldn't be done?
Thank you for the question. That was under the issue of it, whether it being a 1 or 2 story building. And this is technically a 1-story building. And Heather, Planner Shank, if you would correct me if I'm wrong. Inside the building, it's 11-foot ceilings, and there's a facade at the top. It's still technically a 1-story building, but the facade hides the mechanicals to the building. And so specifically 2-story buildings, this is a 25-foot tall 1-story building, but it's to hide mechanicals. And so when I talked about changing, it was the issue of the views and the leases. So if I said nothing could be done, nothing other than what this particular project was putting forth could be done to change it and still allow the leaseholders of the shopping center to be consistent with their lease.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up?
Please.
So Ms. Shank, am I understanding correctly that this amendment deals with the stacking of spaces and the issue of pedestrian access, but does it also deal with the number of stories?
So originally we had recommended that drive-throughs only be allowed if 2 stories were provided, because that was consistent with what we're looking at in the revised zoning code to, as for all projects, have a minimum of 2 stories to ensure that we're getting that density. And the applicant presented a really compelling case why they couldn't do 2 stories. So the issue of stories just kind of went by the wayside, and they decided that they wanted to see something happen there. But yeah, it's true that they could do the Starbucks without the drive-through. They would be allowed, that would be possible, technically possible under the current ordinance.
Thank you. Follow up, Your Honor. I think, I apologize if you've already answered this, but it sounds like if we make this change, that there could be other drive-throughs, not only proposed on Store Street, but also possibly even within that same shopping center. Is that a possible outcome?
Yes.
And now the amendment refers to 2 other Opportunity Corridor Performance Districts. I'm not that familiar. I know where they are in Pennacook and East Concord, but do you think that this change will have an impact there as well?
I believe that the Pennacook district refers to the site that was recently developed for housing, the apartment buildings. So I would think that's essentially built out. So not anything to worry about for the foreseeable future. In East Concord, I think that site is also built out, but if something were to redevelop there, yeah, they could do this there.
Thank you. I have further follow-up, Your Honor, if that's okay.
Please.
When I looked at the plan, I have all of the concerns that you raised about the impact of this, right near Main Street, the precedent of a drive-through, the lack of consistency with what I think is the vision for downtown. But it also raises a whole bunch of traffic flow and safety issues, and I was wondering if you share those concerns, or if that was addressed, or what you see in that regard.
Yeah, normally we might have a engineering staff sort of look at that stuff and maybe add some comments, but right now we're contracting out all of that work to a private consultant, and since they haven't made the application yet, we haven't sent any of those plans out to get feedback on the type of question that you're asking. So I'm not a traffic engineer, and I'm not gonna assume that there may be some problems there that I don't really have any background to say that about. So it could, when we go through the site plan process, some of those things could come up.
So just one last follow-up, Your Honor. Thank you very much for the time. So do I understand correctly that if this passes, it would allow drive-throughs in this district, but then anyone, including this company proposing one, would have to go back through the planning board process to hopefully address those issues?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Champlin.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for your information that you've shared, Ms. Schenk. My question is this: why are we addressing this request by Brixmor through a change to the ordinance which affects all the OCPs districts, rather than through an exception or a conditional use permit or some other mechanism that was more targeted?
Am I understanding your question is why aren't we proposing to permit it through a conditional use permit?
Yes.
Why are we proposing it by right?
Yes.
That's certainly an option. We didn't really consider it, but that is definitely, something that could be done. It could be done that way.
Follow up, Your Honor?
Please.
Thank you. I think that the chief concern here is that there's a vision for Store Street, which is more urban, more oriented towards the experience that one has on Main Street between, say, the Capitol Center for the Arts and North to Center Street, as opposed to Main Street from the Capitol Center for the Arts south on the east side with various fast food restaurants and whatnot. And the project itself is very exciting in the sense that it's starting to move retail space onto the sidewalk on Store Street, which I think is certainly a long-term goal that all of us share. However, we're opening the door to, within some restrictions, further development of a more fast food restaurant type of ambiance down there, rather than an urban retail experience. So that's the reason for my question, because we're really making a sweeping change here.
Any further no question or okay. Councillor Mattson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Shank, I think I want sort of a clarification is that whether we do an ordinance or whether we allow it to go through a variance or, through it can still be done either way. And it doesn't really prevent, I guess the ordinance opens it up in a more formal way, but it doesn't prevent any applicant from trying to go through the other option. So it's not like we've closed any particular doors because they could still ask for a variance. Am I correct?
They already asked for a variance and were denied a variance.
They were. Okay. So okay. Just wanted to make sure I understood. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, Director Shank, I'm sorry, you want to speak? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to do a little follow-up on what Councilor Champlin was saying, which is that if we were to do it by a conditional use permit, I would want there to be some kind of design standards or criteria by which the board would be able to evaluate whether or not to grant that conditional use permit. And that would take a little bit more research than we had the chance and the resources to do at this time. But since if it's the direction of council to allow this drive-through, then when we do the update of the ordinance, the overall form-based code update, we might end up proposing that it be by conditional use permit, because at that time we will have been able to introduce more like criteria or understanding of how you grant that conditional use permit. So we thought of that as well. We just didn't want to throw something out there without more understanding of what that would mean.
Thank you very much, Director. And I think that concludes the questions. Mr. Manager, do you have anything you wanted to add at this time?
Just to add, and I'll go back several years to my own city planning days. If I recall correctly, you would need to change the ordinance to allow for the conditional use permit for something like this to happen anyways, right? So the city planner is exactly correct, but you in essence have to go and change the ordinance of what you're doing, just as you're going through the process now to change the ordinance, so that you could then go back and do a conditional use permit. So here you go, you're back before the city council doing an ordinance change anyways. So just from a process standpoint.
So seeing no further questions at this time, we're going to open the public hearing. It appears we have a couple people who are attendees who are wishing to testify. The first person I have listed is Ruben. Good evening, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you. Ruben Tversky here, representing Brixmore Property Group this evening. Thank you for hearing. Sorry if there's a little bit of background noise. I'm actually in my son's baseball game, so I stepped away and multitasking. But I really appreciate the Mayor and Council hearing our change of use here. We've been through zoning board, planning board at this point. If Mayor and Council wants, I can touch upon the current leases with the three major tenants of Marshalls, Burlington, and Market Basket, which I think we talked about, which are 2035, which restrict really any real future development that I know the master plan calls out for. And what we saw this project as with the 110 Grill and the future strip center with Starbucks as being the end cap with the potential drive-through. And I think everybody can relate to what we're dealing with now with COVID-19, that the drive-through will really help the center and help the tenant with the limited of inside use. We saw this as really kind of a first step to bringing development to Store Street and a phase one of kind of the redevelopment of the center, which would then allow us, as leases come up or anything else happens in the future, to really reserve the big blocks of mass, the Burlington, the Market Basket, the Marshalls area, for real mixed use potential that I know the Mayor and Council and planning staff has looked for. But all in all, the proposed amendment was really thoroughly discussed and vetted at the planning board meeting. We definitely concur with the planning board recommendations, and we're excited to move forward with the project. If the mayor and council does fit need that to pass the ordinance and continue to work and grow with the city of Concord on future developments on this property. So really thank you for the time, and if there's any questions from anybody else, I'm here to answer.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the council? Seeing no questions, it looks like thank you very much. Greatly appreciate you taking the time this evening.
Your Honor, I do have one question.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. I'm
sorry, I didn't get my hand raised.
Hatfield.
Just, I was wondering if they considered working with Starbucks to have it without a drive-through, that to have that same development, but without the drive-through.
We did, and unfortunately, they're not willing to come to the site without a drive-through. And actually, as of recently, about 2 weeks ago, we received new regulations from Starbucks, and really, we're going to start seeing it from a lot of tenants, even non-drive-through tenants like Chipotle, Shake Shack, that you've never seen with the drive-through. They are now kind of looking at drive-through kind of pickup windows to answer our COVID-19 issues. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Any further questions? I'm sorry, I mean to.
Nope.
Okay, see no one else. Thank you again. Appreciate you taking time to be here with us tonight. And
thank you.
Hope your son does well in his game. The next person I have is Councilor Hirschlag. Welcome back.
How's that?
Good evening. Welcome.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
You can.
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Okay, let me clean this up so that I can see you folks. Hi. Well, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you regarding this zoning ordinance change. So please correct me if I get any of the information or the facts wrong. But as I understand it, the planning board recommended that the queue for the drive-through be reduced from 11 cars to 6. But they also recommended that the building be 2 stories. But the amendment that you're voting on tonight only lists for a 1-story building. Now, my understanding is that that building is going to be 24 feet high, which would allow for almost 2.5 stories. If Brixmor and if the leaseholders for Brixmor are concerned about blocking their businesses, I think the current plans that I've seen, if that was extended, would block their building. So I don't understand the reluctance for the planning board's recommendation for 2 stories. That's my first thought. The master plan and many other the development plans, form-based code, which we've currently spent $100,000 on for the first phase, or if we go forward with the second phase, we'll be spending an additional $100,000. Would not look kindly on a development project of this nature. In fact, we've already seen in the planner's report what the city plans, the city master plans, and other development plans for Store Street would anticipate the type of development, and the developer's project certainly doesn't meet any of those goals. If we anticipate having another 200, 300, 400 people living downtown, and we're going to become a more densely developed downtown with higher density residential, when you look at inner cities and downtowns, many of those areas aren't amendable to drive-throughs. So by allowing a drive-through on Store Street and all the OCPs, I mean, while the planner talks about that the drive-through cannot go between the building and the street, it wouldn't be difficult to develop a gas station down there where the building would be closer to the street and the gas pumps would be behind the building. So I think you're opening up a real can of worms here at the same time that you're also going against plans that have been crafted over the last 10 or 15 years as to what would make the most sense going forward in developing Store Street. So do we want more pedestrian traffic, or do we want to negate that or make it more difficult for pedestrians to access that by increasing the density of vehicular traffic? Let me jump to my back page here. I was a little disheartened to hear that we don't know what type of financial impact this project is going to have. So we don't know if in the short term it's going to cost us money. If we wait, I'm not convinced that we're going to have to wait 15 or 20 years. My understanding is that the leaseholders may not have been approached and asked if they would be willing to look at alternatives to how their businesses would be advertised on Store Street if there were 2 or 3 story buildings lining, adjacent to the sidewalks. So are we going to have short-term gain for a long-term loss? Is the additional traffic that we anticipate, what happens if the traffic that we anticipate is less than what actually occurs there, and then the city is stuck with making road improvements? So I'm very concerned that we don't have any sort of financial reference as to what this project would look like compared to the projects that we see in the master plan and the types of development that were shown by illustration in the report from the planner. So I think that I would encourage the council not to approve this project, or at least table it until you have some better understanding of the financial impact. Nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, but I'm as strong a proponent as anybody for economic development. Living out here in the Merrimack Valley School District, it's imperative that we have more commercial development, and it's just as imperative for the rest of the city. However, if we have a vision for how we want the city to grow and move forward, I'm concerned that this particular project doesn't meet that vision. And I also believe that there are components of the master plan that could be incorporated in this project that won't impact the current leaseholders because of the current development plans. So I would urge you to go back and at a minimum accept the recommendation of the planning board for 2-story buildings on Store Street as opposed to the 1-story. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present my concerns.
Thank you very much. Always good to hear your voice. Hope you're well. Anyone have any questions for Councilor Schilling? Mr. Champlin? Councilor Champlin?
Your Honor, Mr. Hirschlag, thanks so much for sharing your perspective. I'm curious what the source is of your information about, if I heard you correctly, that the tenants in the shopping plaza were not approached about the height of the development.
So as not to implicate the innocent, I would prefer not to give that information at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Have a good evening, Councilor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We have another person from attendees, John Sokol.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Good evening, welcome.
Thank you. My name's John Sokol. I'm an attorney representing Brixmor. I spent most of my professional career living and working in Concord. I'm very familiar with the master plan documents. I was on the Vision 2020 committee and was intimately involved in those planning initiatives. And here we have a developer who's trying to do something good, and the biggest criticism is they're not doing enough. And this developer would like to do something as dense as possible under the current circumstances with what's going on in the retail universe as a result of COVID, as a result of Amazon. I think it's just a tremendous opportunity for the city to have this quality of a development right here, right now. I don't know who has in front of them what materials that were part of the package, but if you look at the picture that was part of Heather's presentation as far as consistency with the 2020 vision plan, and you look at page 2 of the plan that's called out parcel number 2 aerial view looking from Store Street, I mean, this really evokes a lot of things in that 2020 vision plan. We're bringing buildings to the streetscape. We have awnings. We have outdoor seating. We're building sidewalks. We have grassy areas, and it is going to be a lot more pedestrian friendly. And even though the ordinance is worded in a way that applies to the entire OCP district, to really pull something like this off, you need a large site like the Capitol Shopping Center here down on Store Street. And, you know, the planning board didn't recommend 2 stories. It was planning staff recommendation that there be 2 stories. And that was vetted during the planning board process. And one other thing is we did not get denied a variance on this. We did request a variance on this. It was strongly suggested to us that it would be more appropriate to accommodate this via a zoning ordinance amendment than granting a variance. And that's why we went the zoning ordinance amendment route at the suggestion of the ZBA. But having worked at 12 South Main Street for 10 years and looked out over this shopping center every day for those 10 years when I was in the office, this is going to be a great enhancement in that part of town. Right now, the buildings are being built and structured so that they could be added onto upwards in the future. And I know Ruben said it, but this is just phase 1 of what we ultimately, ideally like to do with the shopping center. I think it's a great first step. So thank you.
We have a question from Councilor Keach. Councilor Keach.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Sokol, based on your fairly extensive career in development, business development, would you characterize this project as a catalyst that would spur more development in that area? Because it really is kind of a blighted area right on Store Street. It's in my backyard, and I just see this as an opportunity to kickstart this whole thing. Would you agree with that sentiment?
I think it's a great catalyst, and if you just ignore for a moment the drive-through, and you see how it's done on this site, which is going to be screened, it's going to be cutting through drive aisles or anything. If you just ignore the drive-through for a moment and look at the project, it's a really nice looking project with exactly, I think, what people would like to see up and down Store Street. Maybe with some residential on top, but that not going here. I think it'll be an excellent catalyst.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Kinnison.
Yeah, a question I have is we're not just dealing with a building on this site. We're dealing with an area of the car stacking space. And I'm thinking that's going to take up a lot of space down there that might prohibit a more dense development in that area. So it's not just a building we're talking about. Could you comment on that, Mr. Sokol?
Am I still unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the plan, and again, this still needs to go to planning board review, right? This is just a zoning ordinance amendment that would allow us the opportunity to go talk to the planning board about project-specific features. But if you look at how they've done the drive-through, it doesn't take up much space at all. And what it's taking up is a little bit of existing parking. And I know that planners don't like seas of parking either. And so it's done well. It's not blocking anything. It's not coming into the street. There's no way cars will ever back up into the street, which I know is a big concern for drive-throughs and other locations. And is it chewing up some space? Yeah, but if it wasn't there, I think the tenants would rather have parking there than another building. But I hear where you're going, but I just think at this particular site, given how big it is and given the flexibility of how they have to lay this out on this particular site, it's really not chewing up that much space that could be used for anything else right now. And one of the key tenants that's going to be driving this first phase is requiring it. And if they go away, I don't know what happens with the other two. I don't. So I think all of these are legitimate concerns and questions. And Councilor Hirschlag said that maybe some other things could be added to the project. Maybe that's true. Maybe we'll talk to the planning board about it. I mean, maybe the planning board will have more specific questions about some other things they'd like to see that could be added. It's a big site. It's going to be built out or redeveloped over time in phases. And I think this is a great phase one.
Thank you. Councilor Mattson, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Attorney Sokol, did I hear you say correctly that the buildings that were being built in that location were being structured so that a second story could be put on top eventually?
Ruben can correct me, but that's my understanding, yes.
Okay. So yeah, if that's true, that is actually helpful. Thank you.
I have no one else with any further questions. Unless somebody raise their hand. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sokol. Appreciate your testimony this evening. We have, I apologize, there's no name. We have 603-775-4166.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Manager and Councilors. This is Robert Baker, and I just wanted to, I may have one question, but one of my concerns is that this public process of developing the master plan in Concord 2020 has gone through quite a bit of public input over decades. And the plan that that the master plan was developed out of took in a lot of that public input. And it seems to me that going through the planning board and for people on the planning board sort of, in my opinion, sort of short-circuited this public input process. And I think I think if I'm not mistaken, Mayor Boulay was one of the people who suggested that this plan go ahead through the zoning process and asked staff to look into this, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm concerned that there's been very little public there's public notice, absolutely. The city council put this on the agendas, but there's been no coverage in the Concord Monitor and Patch. There's really, I wonder how many people in the Concord area really know what's being planned down here. I think car culture is a problem. I'm a bicyclist, as most of you know. I used to be on the bicycle subcommittee, and I resigned from that position because I felt that the concerns of bicyclists were really not being considered within the city. There's a strong emphasis towards car culture. So I'm concerned about those things. One of the questions I have is, we have an example of a Starbucks out by Shaw's on Loudon Road. And I've been out there within the last couple of months, and there are some strategic cones in the parking lot that apparently are used to extend the drive-through for that Starbucks. And apparently there are times when the drive-through line is so long that they have to accommodate that within the parking lot. And I don't know what they've done. I don't know if the city planner knows what they've done, but I know that they've tried to accommodate that. And I guess the question is, what's going to happen down here if, for example, the planned 6 or the 11 stacking spaces really needs to be 20 or 25 as people, drive their cars to get their coffee. So I won't ask for, maybe that's something you can think about. Here's my suggestion, is that perhaps you table this and get some more public input from people who may have been involved in Concord 2020 development and the master plan development, and really seek more input from the people of Concord. One last comment is I find it quite interesting that this location is really about where the train station was. And so, what was it, 60 years ago, we tore down the train station, and now we're sort of extending this car culture of having drive-throughs in the downtown. And I just think it's contrary to the master plan, and for the future of Concord, I think it's a bad move. So that's my comment, and I appreciate your time. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. Appreciate you taking time to be with us this evening. Do we have any questions? We have one from Councilor Pierce.
No, I don't have. I have no questions for Mr. Baker. I just have a comment I would like to make when it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Baker? Not seeing any. Thank you again for participating this evening, and very much with this challenging technology. But you took the time, and thank you so much. Appreciate it. Is there anyone else wishing to testify? I don't have any other hands up, but is there anyone who's called in, Mr. Manager?
No, sir.
Okay. Tell you what, Councilor Pierce, if you'd like to make a comment, and then we'll end the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to clarify something. I was tweaked by Councilor Mattson's question about 2 stories, and I have the minutes of our planning board meeting, and that was a question that was asked. And on page 9 of the minutes, if you'll allow me, I'll just read a little snippet here. Chairman Woodfin asked about signage on the top of the buildings. Mr. Arnold replied that he has not had these discussions with tenants. Ms. Shank stated that no one has approached the tenants, but she would like to have the opportunity to discuss options to mitigate their visibility concerns. Ms. Shank stated that it appears that the buildings are 2-story. She asked, why is it okay for a single-story building to be 25 feet high and not have the building be 2 stories? She clarified that she would like more stories to be on top. Mr. Twersky, who testified at the planning board meeting, replied that many tenants have specific internal ceiling height minimums, and those minimums would preclude 2-story construction once mechanicals are factored in, given the existing lease constraints. So just for clarification, to me, that means that under the current conditions, 2 stories would not be allowed. And I'm open for correction. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I have no one else wishing to testify. I have no one else with any questions. So at this time, we're going to close the public hearing, and we will be moving on, Madam Clerk, to item 27B, please.
It's an ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances, Title II Traffic Code, Chapter 18 Parking, Article 18-1, Stopping, Standing, and Parking, Schedule 1, Section 18-1-6, Parking prohibited at all times in designated places for a section of Long Pond Road near Marjorie Swope Park Conservation Area.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manager.
Madam members of the council, on March 22nd of this year, Phil Donovan, resident at 42 Long Pond Road, contacted the city with concerns about on-street parking in the area of the Marjorie Swope Park. During especially busy times, parking on both sides of the road results in a single vehicular travel lane, thereby impeding the flow of traffic and creating a safety hazard. Long Pond Road is approximately 22 to 24 feet in this area. On-street parking also impedes sight distance for vehicles exiting the driveway and entering the driveway of 42 Long Pond Road. The Parking Committee on April 27th reviewed the request and voted unanimously to recommend to the City Council approve the attached ordinance, which you have on file, prohibiting parking at all times along the east side of Long Pond Road for a distance of 125 feet south and 445 feet to the north of the driveway located at 42 Long Pond Road, as shown on the plan that you have. Please note that the driveway is approximately 10 feet wide, and therefore the no parking zone along the east side of Long Pond will be approximately 580 feet. Glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Who has questions for the manager? Okay, seeing none, at this time, we'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone wishing to testify? I have no attendee looking to testify. Is there anyone on the phone? And in the meantime, I'm going to recognize Councilor Hatfield for a question.
Thank you. Mr. Espel, do you know how many cars can park in the lot there?
I just have to look at a plan right now for a second.
And I actually have a follow-up, which is I know that the area around that lot is quite sloped, but I was wondering, given the popularity, which this is like a good problem to have, right? Is there any way that that could be expanded? Because it strikes me as probably not friendly to that, but I just wondered if you had thought about that, given the parking problem.
So to answer that question, we haven't looked at it recently. There has been concern about how many people you should actually have at that location at one time. But it's something we could look at going forward. The concern, though, is that it's not a very large trail. As you know, it just loops and it connects over to other places now. But it's certainly something we could look at. But it's something we'd want to work with the Conservation Commission and the Trails Committee on, too, at the same time.
Thank you.
Back to you.
Any further questions for the manager? Okay, so at this time, we'll open the public hearing. And I see no attendees. Is there any call-ins, Mr. Manager?
We don't have any call-ins, and our best estimate we come up with to answer Council Hatfield's first question is about maybe a dozen spaces safely as far as parking up into the lot.
Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing. And Madam Clerk, if you could read item 27C, please.
An ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances, Title 2 Traffic Code, Chapter 18 Parking, Article 18-1 Stopping, Standing, and Parking, Section 18-1-6 Parking prohibited at all times in designated places, to remove on-street parking near 80 Center Street.
Mr. Manager?
And members of the council, on February 27th this year, Jordan Maher, pardon the name pronunciation, resident of 80 Center Street, contacted the city with concerns about on-street parking in the vicinity of the driveway. Mr. Maher's home is located near the crest of the hill on Center Street. Due to the topographic location of the property, sight distance for the driveway is limited, especially for viewing oncoming traffic approaching from the east. The parking committee met on May 26th and reviewed this request and voted unanimously to recommend that the city council approve the attached ordinance, which you have on file, prohibiting parking at all times along the north side of Center Street for a distance of 50 feet to the east and 20 feet to the west of the driveway located at 80 Center. And the plan is as part of the file. Glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Who has questions for the manager? Councilor Hatfield.
Thank you. And thank you to staff for being responsive to the folks who live on Center Street. I've heard a lot of folks have challenges exiting their driveway due to speeds. And is it correct that the speed on Center Street would be the same on other major streets in the area, but people tend to travel it faster?
I don't know the specific. I thought Center Street, that area was 30, and the average street for most streets is 35. But I think when you're in this downtown area, a lot of them have been changed to 30. But I'd have to look at all the plans for that. So it's relatively the same as everything else that's in the area.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions for the manager? Okay, seeing none, at this time, we'll open the public hearing on this item. I see one attendee who would like to testify. Recognize Jordan Mayer.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
We sure can. Welcome. Good evening.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for letting me speak, and a special thank you to Councillor Champlin for helping me with this concern. So I'll keep it brief. We've lived at 80 Center Street for a little over 4 years, and it was pretty clear right away that pulling out of our driveway was going to be extremely difficult. There's two major issues that we're having. First and foremost, our line of sight is severely limited when looking to the west towards, looking towards, towards the west, towards the traffic circle of Center and Auburn. But our line of sight is pretty much non-existent when looking towards the east, towards Main Street. It's better when there's no vehicles parked on our side of the road, but that's very uncommon. Living here for 4 years, I've seen plenty of other spaces available, even when Center Street is busy, but they seem to always congregate and be at the top where we live. And the other thing is the other side of the street seems to always have available spaces. But again, for some reason, people like to park on our side of the street the most. My wife and myself and our tenants have found that we often need to either take a right out of our driveway, which would be west, in order to get out of the driveway, even if we have to go left. But because the line of sight is so terrible, we find that we just can't even take the risk. So we just end up having to go right and then go down to the traffic circle and loop around. Sometimes when that's not an option, I'm forced to roll down both my windows, shut off my AC, and turn off my radio so I can at least hear the cars coming. And even then, sometimes it's a guess pulling out if I had to go left towards Main Street. And so the other thing that's a problem that kind of adds on to this issue in the first place of line of sight is first responders. So ambulances are a lot easier to hear coming because they're pretty heavy and I can hear the chains. But the thing that concerns me the most, and I've had a couple really close calls, is police. They usually go, if they're in a hurry, they'll be going at least 50 miles an hour up Center Street. So if I were to ever time that wrong with them coming up at the hill, it could kill me, it could kill my wife, it could kill the police officer too. And I guess the final concern is I have two small children. I have a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old. And my guess is if we were to ever get hit, it's most likely the rear of our vehicle would be totaled, which, without a miracle would kill my children. And I know that sounds harsh, but it's a daily issue we've been running into for years. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time this evening. Does anybody have any questions? If not, I really appreciate you coming out tonight or participating this evening. We'll be taking a vote this evening on this item. So if you want to stay with us, you'll hear the outcome. All right. Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else? Don't see anyone else. Is there any callers, Mr. Manager?
We do not see anybody else.
Okay, at this time, we'll close the public hearing on this item then. Brings us to item 27D. I will point out that we have a revised resolution that's been submitted. Can we get a motion to put the revised resolution before us?
So moved.
Second. Motion made and seconded to put the revised ordinance before us.
Again.
Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Councillor Bouchard.
Yes.
Mayor Boulay.
Yes.
Councillor Champlin.
Yes.
Councillor Fennessy.
Yes.
Councillor Grady Sexton.
Yes.
Councillor Hatfield.
Yes.
Councillor Keach.
Yes.
Councillor Kennison.
Yes.
Councillor Credit.
Yes.
Councillor Mattson.
Yes.
Councillor Nyan.
Yes.
Councillor Pierce.
Yes.
Councillor Rice Hawkins.
Yes.
Councillor Todd.
Yes.
And Councillor Werner.
Yes.
Great, thank you. That is a revised order, of course, and Madam Clerk, if you could now read item 27D, please.
Yes, it's a resolution appropriating the sum of $550,000 for the Merrill Park Pool Replacement Subproject, CIP number 623, and authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds and notes in the sum of $550,000 for this purpose.
Mr. Manager.
Honor members of the council, the Merrill Park Pool has reached its end of its useful life and is programmed for reconstruction in the fiscal year 21 budget. As you recall, the funds were not appropriated as part of the budget because of the current financial situation. We were waiting to see how the June tax revenues went, and went very well. So in order to complete the construction of the project and have Merrill Park Pool available for June of next year, work will need to commence this summer. And most of the planned construction is concrete work and is weather dependent. So if you would like to be able to use that pool next year, you would need to appropriate the funds now to be able to have us be able to start construction of the pool. Glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions for the manager? I have one hand, Councilor Hatfield.
Thank you. Mr. Spell, I didn't get a chance to read the revised resolution, but it looks to me like the change might be in the third section, paragraph on page 2, but could you point me to?
So on page 2, there was wording for use of tax increment financing district funds, which was boilerplate language from a previous order. So that is not necessary to have in there, so we've had that removed.
Follow up?
Please.
In paragraph 3, it says on the second line, it says is authorized to issue $550,000, but then in parens it says 456. Is that just a typo?
Yes.
So is it still 550 or has it changed to 456?
Yeah, that's wishful thinking, but it's 550.
Yes. I was just wondering, it's great that tax revenues are where they are given what's going on, but I just wondered if I had 2 questions. I mean, it's compelling to me that we have this pool available next summer, and hopefully we're doing pools, but I just wondered if you had considered any other options that were less expensive. And I guess perhaps at a future meeting, we could talk about what we can do to help you and the staff do whatever we need to do to try to make sure that pools open next summer, so that we could take advantage of this one, but then also the others. I know you've heard from a lot of folks, and I have too, that it's been really hard to not have that resource. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to have a question for the manager on this one?
My first question, sorry, Your Honor, to jump in. My first question was, is it possible to do anything that's lower cost, or is it the staff's view and the manager's view that this really is the only path?
We've actually worked with the Park Recreation Advisory Committee of the neighborhoods to come up with these plans. So this is what the residents and the citizens have asked us to do. And this is the price if you want to do it. So I could see if there's concerns about revenue, then hold off from doing this, and there just be no park at Merrill Pool for next year.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, and Councilor Rice Hawkins is still in her seat. That one. We will now open the public hearing, and I would like to recognize 603-775-4166, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, this is Robert Baker. One of the interesting aspects of this COVID crisis is we don't have access to the pools this year. And I believe a couple of the pools have been rebuilt in the last couple of years. So that's well over $1 million in infrastructure that is unusable. And it's been very unfortunate that there have been some people going to the river and some people have lost their lives. That's an unfortunate tragedy, and who knows if the pools had been available. One of my concerns is that this is a large investment, $500,000. And what we're missing in the city, and this is perhaps a little off topic, is that we aren't supporting an urban canopy rebuilding. And I wonder what would happen if instead of investing this money now in the pool, what if you took $50,000 a year over the next 10 years, so $500,000, and invested in developing the urban canopy and really giving general services the money they need to support a renewal of that urban canopy. Now, the other thing that this relates to is the stormwater management. Trees are very effective in stormwater management, and in the plan that was for stormwater management, not a thing was, there wasn't any mention of using trees. So I think there's an opportunity really for the city to do some investment that would give people relief of shade in the city, and I'll leave it brief and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Baker? Seeing none. Thank you again, Mr. Baker. Appreciate your testimony. I see no, are there any other attendees wishing to speak? Okay, anyone on the phone, Mr. Measure?
No, sir.
Okay, with that then we will close the public hearing and we will, Madam Clerk, if you could read item 27E, please.
Yes, it's a resolution appropriating the sum of $6,000 for EMS warm zone equipment and accepting the sum of $6,000 in grant funding from the Department of Safety State Homeland Security Grant Program for this purpose.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manager.
And our members of the council, the Concord Fire Department continues to train on active shooter incidents. The fire department has been training on the rescue task force concept, which places fire department personnel in what's considered a warm zone with appropriate personal protective equipment to provide for more immediate medical response to victims. The intent of this grant is to replace existing protective equipment and medical supplies that have reached the end of their life cycle. This will allow the fire department to have continued ability to respond to active shooter incidents and utilize the rescue task force concept. There's no matching funds, city funds for this grant. I'm glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the manager? Okay, seeing none, we'll open the public hearing at this time. Any attendees wishing to testify? I don't see any attendees. Mr. Manager, do we have anyone on the phone?
No, we do not.
Okay, well, with that, then we will close the public hearing on item 27E. And that takes us to our action phase. Madam Clerk, if you could read item 28, please.
Yes, it's an ordinance amending the code ordinances, Title 4 Zoning Code, Chapter 28 Zoning Ordinance, Article 28-2 Zoning Districts and Allowable Uses, Section 28-2-4 Allowable Principal Uses, and Article 28-5 Supplemental Standards, Section 28-517 Certain Uses in the Opportunity Corridor Performance District, and Article 28-7 Access, Circulation, Parking, and Loading, Section 28-7-4 Requirements for Stacking Spaces for Drive-Through Facilities.
Thank you very much. With that, we can start. Is someone willing to?
Councilor Nine moves approval.
Okay, we have a motion.
Councilor Pierce, second.
Motion been made and seconded to approve this item. Is there any discussion? Councilor Champlin.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to vote in favor of this. I do have reservations about unintended consequences with other possible drive-throughs on Store Street. However, I've been waiting for a long time to see development on the sidewalk on that street. in order to see it start to realize its full potential. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that this can be the first step towards the kind of development that we've been looking for on Store Street. So I will be voting in favor. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. I have Councilor Fennessy.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm a little torn about this. One thing that bothers me a little bit as I'm looking at the elevation versus the site plan is that the west side elevation shows a flat front on the Store Street side, but if you look at the conceptual site plan, it's showing the cars are going to be stacking up between the building and the street. So I'm a little confused. My understanding was that we weren't going to have stacking between the street and the building, and I don't know if the city planner is still available, but I guess I'm confused. Perhaps Councilor Pierce could answer that question.
Councilor Pierce?
You know, once I get the right button, I need two hands for this. I'm not sure what Councilor Fennessy is referring to on between the buildings. If you visualize, I'm looking at a map. It was in the package. On the corner where you entrance would be a restaurant, perhaps a 110 grill, some loading zones, some retail space. This is as you're moving south on Store Street. The Starbucks, and then a U-shaped drive-through with access, entrance and exit within the parking lot, and fences on the street. So as you go down Store Street, you really don't even see cars stacked up. So in what part of that layout is your question based?
Sure. So my question is, and I think we might be talking about the same thing here. So I'm looking at page 1. I can see the U-shaped drive-through with the cars. And it looks like there's some sort of a decorative screen between the road and the building. But when I go to page 2, the conceptual plan shows me an elevation where there's no U. So that's where I'm a little confused.
May I jump in, because I had the same confusion earlier and I think I can explain.
Sure. That's what I thought.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilor Fennessy, for the question. That caught my attention too. And I think it's when you look at that first plan and you can see the whole U-turn. When you look at pages 2 and 3, you're only seeing the end of the U where it comes up against the drive-through window. So that whole piece is to the right of that. So go back to the first page and there'll be, as Councilor Pierce was just mentioning, there'll be the screen between the street and that, but it looks almost like you're going through the building. You're not, it's to the right of the building. Does that make sense? We just don't see in images 2 and 3, the whole drive-through.
I guess I'm confused still though, because in looking, it seems to me that the drive-through goes around the building.
Councilor Fennessy, I'll take a shot at this one. Now,
Sure.
You're familiar with this area. You park on Depot Street. So if you were to look down from your parking lot and you look down where Pleasant Street comes in, you'll see that on the corner is the way I understand they're here. They have the restaurant on the corner. They then have outside dining. They then have retail space, and then they have the coffee shop. At the end of the coffee shop, which would be further towards the Liquor Commission building, there is a U-shaped drive-through that stacks up within the parking lot. So I look at it. I see it's an interesting choice that the owners of this development is choosing to take their own parking spaces to create the drive-through. But I guess that's their choice. Did that answer your question?
I think I understand now. So there's nothing actually within the U. That's not a building.
No. I have Councilor I'm sorry, I apologize. Did you have a further question? Or not at this moment?
I did not at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Todd.
You're muted.
Sorry, I had a little trouble there. Got it now. Thank you, Your Honor. I have the same concerns expressed as others have already discussed tonight about setting a precedent or opening a door for future projects that might not be in line with what we have historically envisioned, both in the master plan and certainly Concord 2020 plans, which I was heavily involved with. So this is really not an ideal process because we're basically second guessing what should now be updated in the master plan without having gone through the master plan process. Of course, we're talking about the 2020 master plan. We do need an update. So to that extent, I agree with Mr. Baker's testimony earlier. However, I think it's also not necessarily fair that because we haven't had an opportunity to go through that process and do those updates that we hold back a project in this area that has, I think as Councilor Champlin mentioned, we've been long waiting for a kickstart here. So I am also going to vote in favor as I'm willing to make that exception tonight, but with what I mentioned earlier, that there is certainly some hesitation here. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councilor Rice-Hawkins.
Thank you. I have similar concerns about the precedence it starts. And while I'm comfortable with this particular project, I do want to acknowledge that if there were another process to go through, I'd rather do that. I do want to say about the drive-throughs in general, just a different perspective as a mom who spent mostly 2 years of her very high need spirited child's life driving around in cars for naps. Sometimes it's nice to have a drive-through that you can go through. And so I think having one in the downtown area isn't necessarily off-putting to me in that context. And I think about my friends with limited mobility. Sometimes having an option like this is helpful. I do have concerns though about the how it adheres to the master plan. So again, if there were another option to do some kind of conditional use permit, I'd be more interested in that. But in the absence of that type of proposal, I would support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Credwick, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll also be supporting this proposal that's before the council this evening. I saw this as other councilors have mentioned as an opportunity, a rare opportunity. Having worked at Main Street Concord when it originally started, and the whole concept on Store Street talked about bringing the stores forward, plus of course the Concord 2020 vision. It may not be visioning what we expected, but it is visioning the street line, as Councilor Champlin had mentioned. I think it's worth the risk, given where retail environment is right now and the potential for what we could lose as a city, as a state, and as a country in our retail environment. This becomes really important in building community. I love the outdoor seating that they've planned in between. It develops that sense of community that we already have in our downtown. I think it starts us on a trend. And given the fact that there'll be a further process with the planning board, zoning board, et cetera, this is a step in the right direction, and I'm all in favor for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else wishing to share their thoughts here? I want to make sure I get a chance for everybody to speak. I don't see any more hands. Okay. We have a question before us. Motion been made and seconded to approve this item. Are you ready for the question? Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Councilor Bouchard.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Councilor Bouchard, I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I had an IT problem. Can you repeat the motion for me?
The motion is to approve item 30.
Yes.
It's actually item 28.
You know, if I would turn the page back, I would see it as item 28. Thank you.
So it's the project on Store Street.
So Mayor Boulay.
Yes.
Councilor Champlin.
Yes.
Councilor Fennessy.
Yes.
Councilor Grady Sexton.
Yes.
Counselor Hatfield,
No.
Counselor Keach,
Yes.
Counselor Kennison,
As much as I like Starbucks coffee, I'm going to vote no.
Counselor Kretovic,
I'm a yes.
Counselor Matson,
Yes.
Counselor Nyan,
Absolutely.
Counselor Pierce,
Yes.
Counselor Rice Hawkins,
Yes.
Counselor Todd,
Yes.
and Counselor Werner.
Yes.
Madam Clerk, roll call.
I'm sorry, it passed 13-3.
I received 13 votes, needing a majority. The motion is adopted. Madam Clerk, I believe that takes us to item 29 now.
Getting closer to 30. An ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances, Title II Traffic Code, Chapter 18, Parking, Article 18-1, Stopping, Standing, and Parking, Schedule 1, Section 18-1-6, Parking prohibited at all times in designated places for a section of Long Pond Road near the Marjorie Swope Park Conservation Area.
I move approval.
I will second.
Motion made and seconded to approve this item. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none, Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Councilor Bouchard,
Yes.
Mayor Boulay,
Yes.
Councilor Champlin,
Yes.
Councilor Fennessy,
Yes.
Councilor Grady Sexton,
Yes.
Councilor Hatfield,
Yes.
Councilor Keach,
Yes.
Councilor Kennison,
Yes.
Councilor Kretovic,
Yes.
Councilor Matson,
Yes.
Councilor Nyan,
Yes.
Councilor Pierce,
Yes.
Councilor Rice Hawkins,
Yes.
Councilor Todd,
Yes.
and Councilor Werner.
Yes.
And with that, the motion is adopted. Madam Clerk, item 30, please.
It's an ordinance amending the Code of Ordinances, Title II Traffic Code, Chapter 18 Parking, Article 18-1, Stopping, Standing, and Parking, Section 18-1-6, Parking prohibited at all times in designated places, to remove on-street parking near Edie Center Street.
Move approval.
Second.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve this item. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, ready for the question. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes. Councilor Bouchard,
Yes.
Mayor Boulay,
Yes.
Councilor Champlin,
Yes.
Councilor Fennessy,
Yes.
Councilor Grady Sexton,
Yes.
Councilor Hatfield,
Yes.
Councilor Keach,
Yes.
Councilor Kennison,
Yes.
Councilor Kretovic,
Yes.
Councilor Matson,
Yes.
Councilor Nyan,
Yes.
Councilor Pierce,
Yes.
Councilor Rice Hawkins,
Yes.
Councilor Todd,
Yes.
and Councilor Werner.
Yes.
And with that, the motion is adopted. Madam Clerk, item 31, please.
It's a resolution appropriating the sum of $550,000 for the Merrill Park Pool Replacement Subproject, CIP number 63, and authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds and notes in the sum of $550,000 for this purpose.
Move approval.
Motion made and seconded to approve this item. I'll just note there, this is the revised resolution that we approved earlier, or put before us earlier. So with that, is there any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, just I think there was also an additional change that we identified during the public hearing portion that there was a little bit of language that, or just I guess some numbers that need to change.
Mr. Manager, do you have those? Or more importantly, Madam Clerk, do you have that?
I'm sure Tom has them.
In terms of what Council Hatfield brought up? Yes, so you want to change on the revised resolution, you'd want to change the 456,000 to 550,000. which is an item number 3, as you pointed out.
Thank you.
I've got,
Okay, I guess now I'm confused. So I've got the resolution in front of me. Can you please point to me where you're making a suggested change?
So if you go to page 2 of the resolution,
Yes.
the on number 3.
Okay.
You'll see there's where it says $550,000.
Yes.
Fees $456,000.
Yes.
That's what Councilor Hatfield.
What should the number be?
It should be 550,000.
Got it.
As much as she would like it to be 456,000.
Sounded like it want to be 0. I don't know. Jeez, it's people in Ward 10. It's 4 people. My goodness. All right. So simply, so we're posting people. I can't remember. I believe it was Councilor Grady Sexton, seconded by Councilor Rice Hawkins. Moves approval. Are you willing to make that change to item 3 on page 2, the 456 to the 500,000?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So with that, is everybody clear in the motion now?
I have a question. Is the amount 500,000 or 550,000?
Depends who we ask.
550.
550. Same as it is on the front page. 550. I'm probably said it wrong. I apologize if I did. So what I do have one hand who wishes to speak, and that is Councilor Rice Hawkins.
Thank you. I think it goes without saying that the pools really add to the quality of life for Concord families, and we've certainly all heard families who felt the absence of that this summer. Hopefully we'll be in a much better place next year, but it also just makes fiscal sense to make this investment now instead of incurring more costs just to have to make the improvements later on. So I'd appreciate your support for it.
Very much. Anyone else wishes to comment? Okay, seeing none, I'm ready for the question. Have I confused the question enough? Okay, Madam Clerk, if you call the roll, please.
Councilor Bouchard,
Yes.
Mayor Boulay,
Yes.
Councilor Champlin,
Yes.
Councilor Fennessy,
Yes.
Councilor Grady Sexton,
Yes.
Councilor Hatfield,
Yes.
Councilor Keach,
Yes.
Councilor Kennison,
Yes.
Councilor Kretovic,
Yes.
Councilor Mattson,
Yes.
Councilor Nyan,
Yes.
Councilor Pierce,
Yes.
Councilor Rice Hawkins,
Yes.
Councilor Todd,
Yes.
and Councilor Werner.
Yes.
Okay, have received the necessary 2/3. The motion is adopted. Madam Clerk, item 32, please.
It's a resolution appropriating the sum of $6,000 for EMS Warren Zone equipment, accepting the sum of $6,000 in grant funding from the Department of State Homeland Security Grant Program for this purpose.
Move approval.
And I'll second.
Motion made and seconded to approve this item. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, Madam Clerk, if you call the roll, please.
Councilor Bouchard,
Yes.
Mayor Boulay,
Yes.
Councilor Champlin,
Yes.
Councilor Fennessy,
Yes.
Councilor Grady Sexton,
Yes.
Councilor Hatfield,
Yes.
Councilor Keach,
Yes.
Councilor Kennison,
Yes.
Councilor Kretovic,
Yes.
Councilor Mattson,
Yes.
Councilor Nyan,
Yes.
Councilor Pierce,
Yes.
Councilor Rice Hawkins,
Yes.
Councilor Todd,
Yes.
and Councilor Werner.
Yes.
Having received the necessary 2/3, the motion is approved and the resolution is adopted. That takes us through our reports section for this evening. I'd like to take a 2-minute recess so that we can have everybody give their full attention to the report from the Energy and Environment Advisory Committee. So we take a 2-minute, and I actually mean 2 minutes. It's not a 2 minutes. Okay? Thank you.
Doing Rob.
Good.
Long meeting, huh?
In recess.
Okay, do we have everybody back? Okay, it appears we do. Madam Clerk, can you read item 33?
Yes, it's an Energy and Environment Advisory Committee presentation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Manager, who should I recognize?
We'd like to bring on Mina Grant to do a sustainability fellow to do a presentation.
Great.
Could I say just a few words first, please?
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, I appreciate that, Your Honor. So what you're about to hear is a lot of terrific work, and I never want to thank the city administration, the mayor, and my colleagues for supporting this effort. I think what you'll see is a tremendous effort that will aid us in our energy efficiency and energy goals going forward by producing a baseline of data. And we'll have some time for questions, but this is just the start of this particular kind of project. And I think it also points up the value of this kind of data collection and analysis in terms of what we might do in the future in terms of other efforts with cooperation of the administration and council. So thank you. I'll turn it over to Ms. Grant.
Thank you, Councilor. I appreciate that. That was a good introduction. And Ms. Grant, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Hi, it's nice to be here. Can someone either start I have a couple of slides, more than a couple, but can someone start them, or can I share the screen?
I have no problem with you sharing the screen if as long as they have the ability to do that.
This is Brian LeBrun. I just need to promote her to a panelist to do that. Hang on.
I believe she is.
No, she was just in as a talker.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, you should be able to share your screen now.
Hi.
Hey, welcome. There you are. If you wish to share your screen, it's all yours.
Okay. Great. Can you see the presentation?
Perfect. Perfect.
Awesome. All right. All right, so hi everyone. My name is Amina Grant, and as Rob said, I'm the UNH Sustainability Fellow who worked with Sam, Jessica, and Rob this summer, defining the baseline greenhouse gas emissions in Concord. So climate change is a problem the city is familiar with. The city has taken great strides in reducing its climate footprint, from purchasing green energy for government buildings to signing the climate mayor's and committing to the state's climate action plan's target of reducing emissions 80% by 2050. The City of Concord government has also adopted a 100% renewable energy goal by unanimous vote, committing to 3 community-wide targets: 100% renewably sourced electricity by 2030, 100% renewably sourced thermal energy by 2050, and then 100% clean transportation by 2050. The city has also drafted a strategic plan to reach their energy goals, where they identified greenhouse gas emissions tracking and interim targets as an important next step. And that's where I come in. So this summer, I conducted 2 greenhouse gas inventories, exploring and defining Concord's climate change impact. For the year 2019, I looked at the community through 2 separate lenses. Local government operations, abbreviated here as LGO, are the activities and facilities in the City of Concord government, and then community-wide accounting are the activities and infrastructure in the Concord community as a whole. So what I'm showing here are the different greenhouse gas sources of emissions and removals considered in each inventory. The goal of these inventories is to help the city prioritize strategies that are cost-effective and significantly reduce emissions to reach the city's energy targets and then global scientific greenhouse gas targets, and then to engage stakeholders in reducing emissions. This inventory also defines a replicable baseline for future inventories to build off of. So the rest of the talk, I'm going to give an overview of the results from each inventory and then some recommendations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the largest sources. So we're going to start with the local government operations inventory and then the emissions released by the City of Concord government. So in 2019, the city government released about 12,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And for context, 1 metric ton is about the same mass of a small car. So the majority of these emissions were due to combusting stationary fuel, which in this case is natural gas, processing wastewater at the treatment plants, consuming electricity, and the transportation done by municipal fleets and employees commuting to work. Waste generated by the city, employee travel to work events, and fertilizer application barely contributed 1% of the emissions. For example, the largest source of emissions was due to stationary fuels or building fuels. And the city consumes natural gas for heating buildings and operating machinery, which accounts for about 27% of the total emissions. One way to reduce these emissions on the short term would be to improve thermal energy efficiency in weatherizing city buildings. So insulation and air tightness in buildings. On the long term, the strategy would be to convert these buildings, pumping stations, and other infrastructure that use natural gas to use electricity instead. And speaking of electricity, it was the 3rd largest source, accounting for 21% of the emissions. Fortunately, the city already offsets these emissions by purchasing renewable energy credits from a 100% wind power operation. So these credits reduce the total emissions by that 21%. So some other strategies that you can focus on would be encouraging energy efficiency in employee commuting with programs like carpooling or encouraging biking and walking for those who live close enough, and then energy efficiency in vehicle fleets, such as adopting no idling practices. A second one would be reducing energy in city facilities. So the 5 facilities that use the most natural gas and electricity in 2019 was the Hall Street and Pennacook wastewater treatment plants, the water treatment plant, the Combined Operations Maintenance Facility, and then the Everett Ice Arena. So starting there and then moving to different buildings would be a good idea. And then a third one that I wanted to touch on was electrifying the city fleets and building appropriate electric charging infrastructure. So from the emissions from the city vehicle fleets, if you electrify the cars, the SUVs, the vans, and the pickup trucks, that would reduce the emissions from that fleet over 50%. However, when you look at the emissions released by the whole community, the local government contributes only a small portion of them. I want to point out that in the previous inventory that looked at local government operations, it considered a slightly different set of emission sources than the community one that I'm getting into. So the total emissions from local government will be a little different. I also want to point out that in the commercial and institutional sector, it includes commercial businesses, industry, public schools, and state government. So in 2019, the Concord community released about 496,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And the commercial, industrial, and institutional areas accounted for about half of the emissions, just slightly higher than the residential areas. So within that commercial and institutional areas, stationary fuel or building fuel was the biggest source of emissions, whereas for residential areas, it was transportation. And looking overall, building fuels was the biggest source of emissions, followed by transportation and then electricity usage or consumption. The four smallest emission sources that I kind of boxed in at the bottom, T&D stands for transmission and distribution, so losses due to heat in the power lines. Those four small ones barely contributed 2% of the total. Looking a little closer at the energy sources used in buildings and other built infrastructure in Concord, natural gas was the most used source. Residential areas use a mix of electricity, fuel oil, natural gas, propane, and wood to heat homes, where in the local government, only natural gas is used. So to address some of these emission sources and sectors, some strategies may focus on identifying emissions from the largest commercial buildings. So working with and promoting these buildings as leaders in reducing their impact on climate change is a way to go. A second one would be reducing building fuel consumption in all sectors. So in the commercial and institutional buildings, the residential areas, local government, because reducing that consumption will reduce the cost associated with it. And this can be done by weatherizing old buildings or promoting the community action programs and Unitil's ratepayer funded fuel efficiency programs, upgrading energy efficiency in buildings, transitioning to new heating technologies. There's a lot of different ways to kind of go about that second point. And then lastly, building the capacity for electric vehicles charging in Concord. So in 2019, there were 53 registered electric vehicles, which is 26 higher than in 2018. So Concord can encourage and promote electric vehicle purchasing or have a program for trading in old cars for residents, developing better bike lanes and walkability in Concord, transitioning municipal fleets to electric, and incentivizing commercial businesses to transition their fleets too, is some possible strategies. And then as the city works towards their 100% renewable energy goal, they should reach 80% and 80% emissions reduction by 2050, with all three targets satisfied. So the clean transportation, the renewably sourced thermal energy, and electricity are those three targets. And then to meet that 80% reduction, lowering the 2019 levels by 22% by 2025, and then 40% by 2030 would help tremendously. Looking just at 2030, if you only reduced 100% of the electricity consumption emissions, then Concord would only reduce the total amount of emissions by 18%. But if you reduce 100% of electric, 35% of transportation, and 35% of building fuel emissions, By 2030, then you'll reduce the total amount by 40. And Concord really needs to start on all three targets now instead of waiting by 2030 to start with the other two and work on them until 2050. The city also needs to take into account the growing population, which will increase emissions in Concord. So emissions are projected to grow 11% by 2050 from the 2019 level. So to bring it back to the purpose of this project, defining these baseline greenhouse gas emissions in Concord have helped us understand what data goes into these inventories from a top-down approach to find out what sources and sectors contributed the most, but also made clear what new directions need to be explored further. So the commercial, institutional, and residential sectors contribute the most emissions. So some emerging questions include what businesses have the largest carbon footprint, and can we work with them to reduce their impact? What products and services do households use or consume, and what unsustainable practices occur in households? And can we address them and move towards more sustainable ones? This will move the community-wide inventory towards a more bottom-up approach and invite input from the community instead, ultimately working towards Concord's 100% renewable energy goal. So that concludes my presentation, and I would really like to thank Sam, Jessica, and Rob, and the UNH Sustainability Institute for their commitment, knowledge, and welcoming personalities. I also want to thank the city employees, public utilities, schools, and community leaders that really helped me collect all of my data and provide insight on the Concord community. So this is a really great way to learn about how local government addresses sustainability in their communities and how data can influence policy. Thank you for listening, and I'll take any questions.
Can I unmute myself? Sorry. Before we take questions, I just want to simply say I want to thank you. This was an excellent presentation, very informative. And when the committee came to us and suggested this could be done, we embraced it, and we're sure glad we did, because I think we've done a great job, and I just appreciate your effort around this. So who has questions for Ms. Grant? Ms. Grant, would you mind taking your screen down and make, hey, there we go. Okay. Councilor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Grant. That was terrific. In some of your earlier slides, and you were talking about commercial buildings and government buildings. While you've been working on this for some time, I can imagine, were there any effects on some of your numbers and some of your study regarding, with the COVID crisis now, bringing in more fresh air into buildings in the winter months and anything like that? Was that ever discussed?
Not in my particular study, because I focused primarily on 2019, but that definitely needs to be taken into account for a future inventory that's done. You might not want to use 2020 as a year to collect data, because COVID makes it pretty strange. But yeah, that definitely affects kind of looking at emissions reductions over the years.
Thank you.
Councilor Rice Hawkins.
Thank you. Thank you. A really great presentation. I missed, I think, 2 or 3 slides from the end. You talked about the increase in emissions from population growth and what the expectation would be. What was the year you had on that and the percentage?
Yeah, so from 2019 to 2025, it'll increase about 2%. And then from 2019 to 2050 was the one that I talked about. It'll increase about 11%.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Hatfield.
Thank you, Your Honor. And thank you so much, Amina. You did an amazing amount of work in a very short period of time, and we appreciate it. Because as we all know, you can't manage what you don't measure. So this is a great place for us to jump off and continue our work on these issues. And I also wanted to thank Councilor Pierce for that question. It's an excellent one. And I think that going forward, when the utilities offer all of us, businesses, residents, the city, the energy efficiency programs that we all pay for, I think that the issue of indoor air quality is going to become an increasingly important one, and it can really be one of the major benefits of doing efficiency improvements, whether it be in a home or in an office setting or any kind of business. It really, not only are you saving money, but productivity can be increased and safety issues can be addressed around air quality. So I think, thinking about all of the different benefits of taking these steps is certainly something that I think the advisory committee will be carefully considering as we make any recommendations going forward. So, and I have to give Amina a shout out. I think it probably goes for the many city staffers, including Mr. LeBrun, that a major breakthrough was made during this work in terms of working with the utilities. And there are communities all across the state who struggle to get their data from utilities. And this really, we kind of crossed over into a new place, and want to thank the utilities as well for working with us, because if we can't access our data, we can't measure what we're using. So that's a really important point.
Thank you very much. Councilor Todd?
Thank you, Your Honor. I also want to thank you, Ms. Grant, for the presentation. I think it will be very helpful, and I think that a lot of these points that you have made in your presentation are data points that we have maybe discussed in different forums in the past, or we've seen them in different incarnations. But again, I think it will be very helpful to have all this, as you've presented it, all in one PowerPoint together like this, so that easy to read and digest, so we can move forward on some of these actions. My question is, and I don't know if you're the appropriate person to answer this, but I assume that maybe it's Councilor Warner, but I assume that there was going to be a plan to disseminate this to the public and maybe get their input and so forth. Is the plan to post this on the city's website in order to do that? And what other means do you have of getting this out to the public? Thank you.
Tell you what, I don't have anyone else. Is there anyone else before I recognize Councilor Warner? Is anybody else? Okay. Councilor Warner,
I can take that question.
Once you wrap this up, and you can answer that question at the same time. And
sure. So, what you'll see as a final report is approximately 80 pages. So we have a lot of data to go from. For example, we know where the major buildings are. We can work with those building owners over time. So it's tremendously helpful to have this data set. And it's something that's really sort of a living document. As far as the public dissemination, we're actually working with folks to get this out officially from the city in terms of a press release. We want the public to know about it. We want their input. There's a way that we can also educate our residents over a period of time. But I think the bottom line is that this is a tremendously useful project. And I really want to thank Amina Grant, and sort of going a little bit off on what Councilor Hatfield said. Apparently, Amina did become the Unitil whisperer in essence, in terms of getting that data and working with them. So thank you for all the work. You were not able to come to New Hampshire. You're a graduate student at the University of Iowa in Iowa City, so you did all of this work. And again, I want to thank the city administration, all of our city employees, and folks throughout the community that helped Amina collect this important data that's going to help us map our road forward. Thank you.
thank you very much. Appreciate it. Ms. Grant, any final thoughts? Or
I just want to point out there will be a smaller report too, not just 80 pages to sift through. There'll be a more like 18-page briefer report with everything that I talked about in this presentation.
you read my mind. Very much appreciate it. Okay. With that, thank you again. Very much appreciate it. And I'm sure hopefully we'll see you in the future here in New Hampshire. All righty. With that, I believe that takes us to new business. I can just read that one if that's okay. Item 34 is discussion of masks relative to the COVID-19 pandemic. I asked for this to be added. I wanted to have a discussion with the council to see what the possibilities might be to having a public hearing next month on making masks mandatory. As you are all aware, many other communities around the state are having this discussion. Some are taking action, others are not. But I believe we probably all received many emails and just received plenty of feedback one way, but probably from all perspectives on this one. But I think that as policymakers for the city, I think it's worthwhile for us to have the discussion and to give people an opportunity to testify on the issue. So the problem I'm facing, and being very candid, is that I am not coming forth. I do not have tonight a final proposal to put down for a public hearing. I really wanted to have a discussion amongst you all as to A, do you want to have a public hearing? And two, how would you like to go forth in putting together a document that the community can comment on? One suggestion might be that we form a small group to work with our city solicitor to come up with something and then post it 2 weeks prior. That's one possibility. If someone has another idea, that I'm all open for any other suggestions. But with that, I would love people's feedback. I think personally it's something we should consider. So I have several hands. First hand I have is Councilor Champlin.
Thank you, Your Honor. If you'll recall, when we last discussed this, I was not supportive of this idea and expressed concerns about how we would handle enforcement. Over the intervening weeks, I have to say that I've become more and more concerned about the lack of mask use. At the end of last month, the Wall Street Journal published an article that was titled "Face Masks Really Do Matter. The Scientific Evidence is Growing." And in that, they stated or they described face masks as emerging as one of the most powerful weapons to fight the new coronavirus, with growing evidence that facial coverings help prevent transmission, even if an infected wearer is in close contact with others. And further, in that same article, the head of the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention stated that he believed that the pandemic that we're in now could be brought under control over 4 to 8 weeks if everyone wore a mask. Furthermore, I become aware that the New Hampshire Medical Society has been urging businesses to have their employees and their customers wear masks. And also they've been promoting mask use in public areas. I think we've been very fortunate in Concord and also in New Hampshire in that the coronavirus outbreak has been tamped down significantly. And there are some people who I think assume that because that's the case, there's really no need to require masks being worn in public places. However, and that if the disease suddenly has a resurgence, then we can take action then. But to my mind, that's really kind of like waiting to install fire sprinklers until one wing of your house is engaged in flame. The time to take steps with a pandemic or with a virus is before it gets out of control, because once it gets out of control, it's very hard to get back under control. Furthermore, our proximity to Boston and Massachusetts is of continuing concern to me. As we've seen, Massachusetts has actually rolled back on some of its reopening steps because of a spike in the coronavirus instances. So I support your idea. I think it's very prudent for us. I think it would be great to engage in a public discussion. The course of action that you propose sounds sensible to me. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Next person I have their hand is Councilor Todd.
Thank you, Your Honor. I want to also thank you for bringing this to the meeting tonight. we're hearing, I think, that the number of new cases of COVID isn't rising, but it's also not decreasing. And I think that that should be an alarm bell for us in the state of New Hampshire and certainly in the city of Concord. We need to see, I think, a decrease in cases continually if we really want to win this battle. So I'm in favor of any measure that we can take that will move us in that direction. I think it's extremely important. So a temporary emergency order requiring the wearing of cloth masks or face coverings in public places and businesses, I think, is an appropriate measure to take. And I'm hearing from a lot of residents and business owners who feel that we really should be moving in this direction. This is something we should be doing. I realize, of course, that some might feel that this should be left to the discretion of the individual as to whether or not to wear a mask in those situations. However, the problem with that, as we can see, is that not everyone uses the same judgment factors or criteria when deciding on whether or not to wear a mask. So I think that that's sort of where our obligation to provide that guidance in an emergency situation comes in. I think that your idea of the group, a working group, absolutely with the city solicitor would be very important. And then getting some public input and so forth is always valuable. But I think that considering the language in the policy is ought to reflect, I assume, whatever CDC recommendations are, and certainly whatever legal obligations we might want to include, that it would probably be a good idea to try to find a way also to move on this fairly quickly. So I like your idea, but I think maybe if there's a way to jumpstart this and have the city manager, fortunately, we're not going to be the first ones doing this. I'm not city manager, excuse me, city solicitor, provide us with some, although you can do that if you'd like to, Mr. City Manager, but provide us with some examples of what others have done, and we can certainly do that research on our own. I guess my final point being time is of the essence. It would be great if we could get this done sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Council Warner.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, I support the comments of my colleagues very much, and I support the idea of having a public hearing. But I do wonder if we're going to do that a month from now, given the 14-day incubation periods of where people are coming from and so forth in different parts of the country. It concerns me in terms of how that incubation period continues to move through our population, even here in northern New England. And then I think a number of us had concerns earlier on about sort of our legal authority, preemption, and so forth. I think those seem to have been largely addressed, and I think that the other communities that have adopted these ordinances, I think the models exist there. So I wouldn't imagine it'd be particularly difficult to create language that is satisfactory to sort of our legal aspects. But I am a little worried about waiting a whole nother month, having hearing, decision, and then having a mandatory situation. Because as Councilor Todd has said, time really is of the essence, and things are going in the wrong direction generally in the country.
Thank you. Councilor Bouchard.
Thank you, Mayor. I do support this, the mask, and going forward with the public hearing. And I like your idea of having a small group to bring something forward for September. And I support everything that's been said. And I also think that this would be, not only I've been hearing from citizens, but I've been hearing from business owners. And I think it would be a help to our business owners who have signs out in front of their businesses saying, please wear a mask. And then when customers do not wear a mask, it puts them in an awkward position. So I think this would be a great help to our business owners. I think we're hearing more and more from our citizens that would like us to do this. We have other communities that have done it. It seems to have been accepted. And I hope that we can move forward on this, not only to protect our public health, but to protect our economy, because the last thing we want to do is roll back and shut down again. So I thank you for bringing this forward, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Fennessy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support us having a public hearing on this issue. I think there's three things we need to think about. as we prepare for a public hearing. One, exactly what the requirement is going to be with respect to masks. Is it just going to be indoors? Is it going to be outdoors? Are we going to put in physical distance requirements? Are we going to have exceptions for people who might have conditions that make wearing a mask difficult for them? Second thing is, who is going to enforce this? I strongly believe that there is a certain segment of the community who is going to ignore this, whether it's a mandate by us through an ordinance or whether it's a requirement of the business. And the question is, once that person says, no, I'm not going to put it on, how are we going to enforce it? Are we going to be using the police force to do that? Are we going to use some other mechanism? How do we want to actually do that? The third thing is, I would be interested to see whether there's any data at this point showing that the institution of an ordinance similar to this increases mask usage. I would certainly hope that it would, but I feel like there's a certain segment of the community who might be more inclined not to do it if it's considered to be a mandate from the government. And so I'd like to see if the communities who have done it already have seen an increase in usage.
Thank you very much. All good points. Councilor Grady Sexton.
Thank you, Your Honor, for bringing this forward. I think it's a really important step to move forward on. It's been really heartbreaking to hear from residents who don't feel safe frequenting businesses and from business owners who have policies that people must wear masks and others are just refusing to do so and they don't feel like they have any recourse. I think a small group is important to put together. I think in addition to the city solicitor, I think that it would be important to have a representative from the Concord Police Department to speak to enforcement issues. I'd be very happy and willing to serve on a small committee. I also think it's worth discussing whether or not there are any options for a special meeting to address this, so we're not waiting, another month. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with all that's been said, and especially the part about not waiting. This is something that we need to do. We need to do quickly. I think there's a lot of data out there. I think in our hearts we know that this does help. As I've mentioned under other issues, I'm not a big fan of regulation, but I am a big fan of respect for one another. And I think this, a mandatory mask order would help us, would help everyone show a little more respect for one another. So I would like to do something. I'm supportive, and I would like to do it sooner than later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councilor Hatfield.
Thank you. I will try not to be repetitive. I agree with a lot of what's been said, and I think Councilor Hennessy raises some good questions, and I hope he might be willing to serve on a small group. And I do think, time's of the essence, and I'm absolutely willing to do whatever needs to be done to get this out before the public as soon as possible so that we can move. And I wish that we didn't have to do this, really, but it's so important that I think we should consider it.
Thank you very much. Councilor Rice-Hawkins.
Thank you. I'm glad we're having this discussion. I'd also be willing to serve on a committee to look into this a little bit more. I think we all know the public health data. I'm also cognizant of not wanting to be caught flat-footed like some other communities were. If there were to be any events planned in the city where we don't have the option at that point to institute a mask requirement. And while I'd really like to see this as a statewide requirement, I think we have to do everything we can to protect Concord residents and the families here in our community. We also have a lot of people traveling through Concord right now and stopping at our small businesses. And as others have mentioned, we've heard from those businesses that it's really tough to be on their own for this scenario. And we really need to do what we can to support them and all the frontline workers who frankly do not have a choice about whether or not they report to work because they need to pay their bills. And they have, in sometimes cases of really serious and health compromising conditions that we really shouldn't leave them further exposed. So I appreciate this conversation. I'm eager to have us move through a special session to make sure we enact it as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. I don't have anyone else with their hands raised. Am I missing anyone? Okay, so it sounds like if we were to put a vote to a vote, and eventually we will, it sounds like people are generally supportive of having a public hearing, and I appreciate that. I think that's important. So I think Council Fennessy raised some good questions that we need to, and Council Grady Sexton, to have some other people at the table, I think is a very good idea as well. So I'm trying to do the calendar look, and where I would like to have something sooner than later. I also recognize that we want to get this right. We don't want to force it and make unintended consequences for mistakes. So I'm trying to balance those two things. I also recognize that it's Labor Day, the beginning of the next month. So I don't have my calendar in front of me. And so Labor Day is on the 7th. Our city council meeting is not until the 14th. Is that right, Mr. Manager?
That's correct. This is Janice. That's correct.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So our city council is not me, and the primary is what day, Madam Clerk?
Tuesday, September 8th.
So, there's part of me who would love to have this in place prior to the primary. I think that if we were so to choose to go forth with this, it would give a great deal of comfort for a lot of the folks who work the election polls, just that little extra bit of safety that, the state says they're bringing the PPE in and all that, which is, I sure hope they do. But we want to make sure those folks who are working at the polls that day are as safe as they possibly can be and they feel as comfortable they can. So I would love to do it before the primary, but I'm looking at the clock and it seems like, we would have to meet before then. We'd have to have a public hearing before then. So, we're looking at like September 1st is the week on the Tuesday, the week before, if we wanted to have a public hearing and such. That gives us really 3 weeks to put something together. And Madam Clerk, we would need to have this posted 2 weeks prior to a hearing. Is that correct?
Your council rules, we usually post public hearings 10 days in advance unless it's an emergency. And I'm sure the city solicitor could weigh in on that, but if you declared it an emergency meeting and public hearing, you could likely do that. I would defer to Jim.
Mr. Kennedy, you have an opinion?
They're your rules. Whoops. Yes, they're your rules, Your Honor. And,
Thank you for reminding me of that, or us of that.
You may suspend them at any time.
Right. Okay, well, I guess I threw out a question. My question to you all is, if we want to do this, do we want to do this prior to the primary or not? Council Rice Hawkins.
I would say so. And also, I think we've got some good policies from elsewhere in the state, right, that we could look at. And if we just need some language to get started, I think Nashua's ordinance is a good one. They've taken into consideration the age of who should be wearing masks, the 6-foot social distancing, some other considerations I think I'm hearing from around the group. So I would even support putting that out as our general proposal. Each of us can collect feedback from constituents and then work out the mechanism, during that public hearing. I think the big difference I've seen in the proposals around the state is basically the enforcement piece, whether there's a fine or not, and communities have differed on that. I'd also direct folks that Westlaw has a series of ordinances from around the country. So if people want to take a look at that and just see generally what some other communities have done, the great resource they have there also talks about the legality of how they've been upheld in those various communities. So that's helpful as well.
Council Todd.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. I agree with what was just mentioned there by Councilor Rice Hawkins. I think that and I understand and I agree with Your Honor that we want to get this right, obviously. But I do think that, yes, it's the enforcement piece I think that we may have the most discussion about. I think that in terms of the language, we're in pretty good shape, really. You know, I'm thinking and envisioning of something like, you know, some important to have some guidance in there. So something to the effect of, it's important that you keep your face covering on while, if there's any reasonable chance of encountering another person. And if you need to take off your face mask, make sure you keep it close by so you can put it back on quickly and properly should you come into close contact with another person. So there are general statements like that that I think we can include. And then if we wanted to, we could also start to think about, you know, it doesn't apply to any children under the age of 2 or individuals who are unable to wear a face covering due to a medical condition. We'd probably want to put something in there like that. We might also then want to specifically, which I think other communities have done, list out the types of establishments that we would have in mind. You know, maybe including without limitation, and then have some. So I think that it may sound daunting, but I think because we're not the first ones to do it, I think that it may not be, timetable wise, that difficult to accomplish it. And I agree with you, Your Honor. I also would like to see if we can go for it, see if we can get this done before the primary. Thank you.
Council Fennessy.
Thank you. I have sort of a legal and maybe a practical question. If we're trying to do it in advance of the primary, is the expectation that we would then be enforcing it with people showing up for the primary, such that they could not come into a polling place if they were not wearing a mask? And my concern would be whether we would be setting ourselves up for a potential issue with the state if we're denying voters the opportunity to participate in the primary.
Never did I ever want to suggest that anybody would be denied access to the polls. That was never the intent, and I hope they were perfectly crystal clear about that. No one will be denied the right to vote, period. Now, could we perhaps hand them a mask on the way in? Maybe. There's your very practical answer. Do you have something further? Okay. Council Warner.
Thank you, Your Honor. You know, the fact of the matter is we're dealing with a societal and public health emergency. And since it was pointed out to us by Mr. Kennedy that we indeed as a body set our own rules, I think we should move with all deliberate speed. A public hearing will allow various voices. Not everyone's going to be supportive of a mandatory mask ordinance, but they will have their opportunity to have their voice heard. But I do think we really need to move quickly before the primary. I'm worried about if we do not.
Thank you. Council Chamberlain.
Thank you, Your Honor. First of all, I want to thank Councilor Rice Hawkins for mentioning the national ordinance. I had intended, but forgot to suggest that when I spoke earlier, that would be a good model. It also has a preamble that talks about the importance and the significance, the danger of COVID-19 and the ease of spreading it and so on and so forth. But I think that, as others have said, as well as Councilor Rice Hawkins, you know, that creates a good model. There's plenty out there to draw from. And I do agree that we should move forward with alacrity. I mean, just today, I had somebody call me about this, expressing deep concern that we're almost into the fall and we really didn't have an ordinance or any regulations on the city level requiring people to wear masks. And I also would like to underscore what others have said about the need of the business community, in particular, for assistance from the city or support in terms of having our own ordinance or our own emergency order on the books. So I agree we should move forward quickly. We should suspend the rules where necessary, certainly hold significant public opportunities for public input, and then take action. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Councilor Keach next.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm not opposed to this in principle, but I do have to say that I think everybody who's inclined to wear a mask is currently wearing a mask. And I'm not sure an ordinance is going to compel those who object for whatever reason, political reasons, philosophical reasons. I'm not sure that's going to compel those folks to wear masks. So I would just caution some folks that this might be more of a feel-good measure than anything else. I am supportive of it because I'm sympathetic to businesses who are caught in the middle when they're trying to enforce their rules. And I think it is a really powerful mechanism for them to fall back and say, hey, the city compels it. So if you've got an issue, take it up with the city, not me. So I'd be in favor for that. But I don't think it's, as I said, I think the folks that are going to wear masks are wearing them now. And I see pretty high compliance. And I personally can't think of a retail store that I frequent where they aren't required at this point.
Councilor Champlin again.
Thank you, Your Honor. I was just in response to Councilor Keach. Anecdotally, I was talking with somebody this week who had spent some time over in Maine, where I believe there is a state requirement, and they said that literally everyone they saw was wearing a mask, and it was such a difference between Maine and when they crossed over into New Hampshire. They felt much more secure over there. We don't want people to feel more secure in Maine.
Mr. Kennedy.
Yes, Council. I wanted to bring your attention that MUR recently released the 6 out of the 225 towns in New Hampshire that have adopted mask ordinances. So we have 6 right now municipalities, actually 7, 7 municipalities in New Hampshire that have adopted mask ordinances. And you can certainly go on MUR and they've got the list of those towns and the ordinance to give you some advice or information about what those ordinances are. To the extent that the city is going to set a public hearing, I would recommend that you provide as much notice as possible for that public hearing so that you can have meaningful participation regarding the public hearing, especially since it will be a special public hearing, not at a normal city council meeting. And we will need to have sufficient evidence at that hearing demonstrating the need for any such ordinance if it is to, if this council is to pass it. So we'll need to have sufficient evidence for that, if that's the will of the council, of course. And then I think it's important that the council understands, and I know that some of you have talked about this already, the enforcement issue. And so while there may not be preemption concerning a municipality to adopt an ordinance, how municipalities enforcing the ordinance might be something else. And so I think we'd want to have police input here and maybe some research or information as to how these 7 other municipalities have been dealing with enforcement of the ordinance through their police department or through other means. And I think Councilor Fennessy raises a very interesting point under the upcoming election. If we have a mask ordinance, what, if any, impact will that have on those entering the polling place? And so we're going to have to do our best to make sure that we understand what that is and perhaps get guidance from the Secretary of State on that issue.
Thank you very much. So I have a proposal for your consideration. So tonight, I'd like to appoint a 5-member committee to work with the city solicitor and other interested people that Councilor Grace Sexton had mentioned, if there were perhaps others, and that today being the 10th, that ordinance be presented to the public, to the community and the council by the Monday the 17th. That gives us a week to complete our work. I think given what we've heard tonight and the examples that currently exist, that there's plenty for us to work with. That would give us from the 17th give us 2 weeks public notice for the public hearing, and we could meet on the 31st, which would be the Monday, or if you wanted to wait till September 1st, we could do that on the Tuesday. Your preference, but it would be at least the week prior to the September primary. Any thoughts of that? I got Councilor Kretovic.
The 31st.
Tuesday the 31st.
Monday the 31st.
Monday the 31st. You'd rather have the poker. Okay.
Yes.
Councilor Champlin, you had your hand up. Nope. Okay.
I was just saying I was in favor, Your Honor. Both dates work for me.
Okay. Councilor Rice Hawkins, I saw you had your hand for a moment there.
Thank you.
Was that? So you're all saying yes, and I haven't even named the 5, huh? You guys have a lot of faith. Okay, so you all said, do you think we can turn around in a week and put it up?
Yes.
Mr. Kennedy, do you have time this week?
I'll make time, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, I would appoint Fennessy, Champlin, Grady, Sexton, Keach, and myself. You're the winners. So we will, Mr. Kennedy, we'll work with you to put together a time where we can all Zoom and review proposals from other communities and come up with our own draft.
Right, and those will be public meetings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Councilor Rice Hawkins.
I've sent the link to the Nashua ordinance and that Westlaw citation to the city clerk to distribute to city council as well. Thank you.
I would just suggest, by the way, I wasn't going to say it, but I think we can work with the municipal association in the sense that I think Council Hatfield serves with them, and there are several communities who are all considering it. They may not have adopted yet, but they're all in process. So there's more than just the 7 who obviously just adopted, and I think the municipal association is probably very well aware of all those other communities as well. So I think there's even more to work with than what we actually referenced tonight. So with that, we'll come back and we'll have something posted for the 17th, and we will have a public hearing on. Everybody okay with the 31st, Monday the 31st? Yes, kind of, sort of. Looks like I got some general thumbs up. Mr. Manager, does that work for you? And I got a nod approval. Okay, great. I thank you for that discussion. I think that's very helpful, and I appreciate everyone's comments, very thoughtful comments tonight. I have no unfinished business coming off the table, so it takes us to comments requests by councilors. Councilor Todd, you're going to cover my topic, so why don't you go first?
I am.
Yes, you are. And I think you'd be the appropriate one to do it. So go ahead.
All righty. Well, and if I don't, Your Honor, you can just take right over for me. Actually, the first, I have 2 items, if that would be all right. The first item I have is, it falls under the category of who says there's only bad news these days, because tomorrow at noon, there's a plan for volunteers to visit Riverside Park on Tanner Street in Pennacook to help spruce it up. And this effort is actually being led by a young gentleman who's a Merrimack Valley High School student, Connor Baldwin, who contacted me in June saying he had fond memories of the park and he wanted to do more to make it a great place for folks to visit and enjoy. And he received some donations of materials from Fox Hardware in Pennacook. He contacted David Gill about some additional seating. He's done a ton of work on this already. And for tomorrow, the main goal is to just be working on some trash pickup, brush cutting, and redoing the walkway. There will be more work, of course, to come in the future, and he's got a lot of interesting plans. Anyone interested in helping can just come on by. Again, that's Riverside Park in Pennacook, Tanner Street, tomorrow at noon. And a big thank you also to Connor, who's doing a great job, as I mentioned, with all the outreach he's doing. And did I mention also he's 17 years old? So after he's done with the park, I'm going to see if we can get him to run for Ward 1. Anyway, this is our face of our future, which is great. So thank you very much. The second item, if I would, Your Honor, I was contacted by a resident today who said that she received a card in the mail stating that registering to vote absentee is as easy as 1, 2, 3. And that by filling out that card and mailing it, you would then receive an absentee voting ballot. And it turns out that the return address listed on the cards sent to Concord residents, for example, says City Clerk, 41 Green Street, Durham, New Hampshire. And as it turns out, that's the case for all the cards mailed throughout the state, apparently in a promotion by the New Hampshire Republican State Committee. They all say Durham for all cities and towns in New Hampshire. So my advice to residents out there is if you receive such a card, please ignore it and don't mail it in, because those cards would not be delivered and you would not get the absentee voting form that you want. Instead, what I'm suggesting is that there's actually no better or easier way to register to vote than to go to the City of Concord website, which has all of the correct forms and information, or contact our city clerk's office, or me or any other counselor for that matter can steer you in the right direction on where to get the information for that. And that's the best way to make sure that you get your ballot, absentee ballot, on time. And also, just one final note, please keep in mind that the demand for these absentee ballots is expected to continue to be very high. So to help our city clerk's office, if you could please plan on applying sooner than later, and remember to send your ballot in early so we can ensure timely delivery of the ballots by the U.S. Postal Service. Thank you, Your Honor. Did I hit on one of the ones you wanted or no?
You did not, but that's okay. Councilor Grady, second.
Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate it. I have spoken with a constituent who reached out to a city councilor through email to express an opinion about a particular matter. And she later found out that that email had been forwarded by the counselor to the entire council. And she had some particular privacy concerns and wasn't aware that that email was going to be forwarded. So I would just suggest to counselors that prior to forwarding any emails, they might speak with a constituent about whether or not that constituent is looking for their correspondence to be shared with the entire group. I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Fennessy.
Sorry, it's turn my fan down so you can hear me. As I'm sure you have all seen by now, the Concord School District has chosen to go 100% remote, which I think is going to have a significant impact on a number of our small businesses and our working families here in the city. So I think I would like to see us, as I mentioned last month, explore ways that we might be able to help many of the working families this fall who I fear will be struggling to have a place for their children to be in a safe environment and also have the opportunity for learning. So I would encourage us all to not only look to our Parks and Rec department to have that conversation, but also facilitate it with various private entities as well. We got a lot of kids who are going to be at home. Some of them will have supervision, but some won't. And we need to figure out a way to make sure they still have the opportunities for learning.
Thank you very much. Councilor Rice-Hawkins.
Thank you. I wanted to give a quick update on where we are with census counts in Concord and the state. So New Hampshire's self-response rate is 63% right now, which is tied for the national average and 25th best in the country. Our community, Nashua and Manchester, have the most hard to reach tracts in the state. So comparative to those communities, Nashua's response rate is just over 72%, Concord's is just under 70%, and Manchester's at 65%. But our neighbor, Bow, still has the highest self-response at 82.8%, so we still need to strive for a little bit of neighborhood competition here. And I did want to alert folks that there's a pretty significant change to the timeline for the census. So originally they had scheduled to do non-response follow-up up until October 31st. That process is now going to discontinue on September 30th, so a full month early, and the self-response also ends on September 30th. So to the extent that you're talking with constituents or using your social media accounts or speaking at events, if you could remind folks that the census counts is really critical for getting the funding we need in our community. They are also continuing some in-person events that they just started up within the last month or so. So if you know of community events where it makes sense to have a census specialist participate in some capacity, they're very interested in looking to get to as many venues as possible, either with statements or to have an actual specialist on site. So if people have recommendations for those types of events in Concord, they'd be willing to help us out with that. And the self-response, just as a reminder, is at my2020census.gov. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to remind the watching and listening public that while we are going full steam ahead on the face mask issue, which I think is great, there is also a public hearing next month at the September 4th meeting regarding time limits on fireworks. Very simple ordinance. And so I look forward to having the public weigh in on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I just had a couple of quick things. First, the August meeting was always fun because this was the meeting that Councilor Cohen, his birthday is today. He always wore his green jacket, his master's green jacket. So I hope today he wore his green jacket for his birthday and for us, and just wish him a happy birthday. The second thing, on a sad note, we all learned of the passing of a fellow colleague, Councilor Liz Blanchard. I had Liz, needless to say, she was pretty special. And but one of the fascinating things was she actually served in the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s on City Council. I don't know if anybody else has ever accomplished that. And I wish I could tell you half the stories that I can think of but I'm gonna, we're in public, I'll keep myself. Let's just say I really enjoyed serving with Liz. She was a special person, and there's no question that we've had some wonderful colleagues from Pennacook, whether it be Mayor Verno or Dave Poulin or the wonderful Brent Todd, but Liz was pretty special, and what she was able to accomplish in Pennacook was also real special as well. So she was a friend. She'll always be missed, and I just always have this visual of her with her convertible, the top down, the license plate that said the commish, and rolling into a city meeting. So she was something. So she will be missed, and I think we will all feel the same way about that. And the last thing is, I think that Councilor Todd covered it really well, but I wanted to give the opportunity to our wonderful city clerk, Ms. Bonifant, the opportunity to just give us 2 or 3 bullet points, if she wishes to, regarding elections, specifically around absentee ballots, because we will not be meeting as a group other than the one we've just adopted tonight in terms of coming together on the 31st. But our regular scheduled meeting is after the primary, and I didn't know if, Madam Clerk, you wanted to share anything with the public regarding the elections or absentee ballots.
Thank you. We have tried to get the word out. One thing that we could always assistance confirming for people is we have relocated our Ward 9 polling location. We will not be voting at Havenwood. We're going to be using the citywide community center. So we're excited about that change, getting the word out. We are looking for ward workers in most of the polling locations in the city. Higher need in wards 8, 2, and 3, but really citywide, we need assistance. We are issuing a lot of absentee ballots. Little trivia for everybody. Typically for state primaries, we issue an average of about 350 absentee ballots. We're currently over 2,000. So we are issuing high numbers like we typically do for presidential elections. So we're definitely keeping busy. kudos to the staff here. They are working many, many hours and doing a great job. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mayor, may I ask a question of the clerk?
Please.
Thank you, Ms. Bonifant. Does someone need to live in a ward in order to be able to volunteer to work the election in that ward?
So to be a ballot clerk, someone assisting in the sense that they're helping with the ballots, absolutely. I have hearsay that the state is going to release some of the ward requirements if we need, greeters that can be outside of the guardrail and things like that. I have a Zoom meeting tomorrow to confirm that with the state. So as far as I know right now, they do, but there may be a little leniency. Any of you that want to help out, and Councilor Hatfield, I know you've expressed your desire to, so if you want to, let me know, because we definitely can use you.
Thank you. And should we send volunteers to your office from around the city?
Yeah, we've actually received a lot of emails and or phone calls, so yes, please, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good questions. Councilor Rice-Hawkins.
My question was about volunteers as well. Thank you. I think it's been answered.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Seeing no one else, or did I miss anybody? Mr. Manager, do you have anything?
No, sir.
Thank you. Okay. Then we have one item that has been removed from the consent agenda. That's item 18. Madam Clerk, if you could read item 18, please.
Yes, it's a report from the Deputy City Manager in Finance recommending approval of the proposed 2021 membership rates for the Beaver Meadow Golf Course, and it was pulled by consent from Councilor Kretovic.
Councilor Kretovic.
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the council, I'll be brief. It's getting late. I do want the council to support the recommendations from the Golf Advisory Committee for the new rates. That's not the issue I want to bring before you. I'm glad that we had a lively discussion about the mask ordinance here in Concord. One of the challenges we're facing at the golf course is that we have a lot of people that are renting carts as singular use riders. Under the current regulations in the state of New Hampshire, this is like the phase 2. It has been relaxed. Of course, Beaver Meadow is a very walkable course, though we are finding people that are setting up tee times in a group of 4 and then taking out 4 carts. We just don't have the inventory to be able to do that. So the council as a whole needs to think of 2 options. One of them is to extend the number of carts that we have, which would help us long term, but we can't make that kind of decision without some real data and talking with our provider to see if we could get more carts. One of the things that we can do collectively is the same thing all of the surrounding courses are doing here in the area, which is charging a surcharge. This is not going to impact the golfer that is already golfing by themselves with a single cart. This is the twosome that paired up together, rode together in a car, and then when they got to the course, decided they wanted a separate cart. We need to charge them a surcharge for that. This is the foursome that shows up and everybody wants 4 carts. This is the threesome that shows up and they want 3 carts. We need to be able to allow our city manager to have that flexibility. And if we see that things are changing and that we slide back to what the regulations are to allow our city manager that authority to make changes. The recommendation here is for $5 if you're gonna take a cart singularly by yourself because you are a twosome and want 2 carts if you're doing 9 holes, and $10 if you're going to do 18 holes. The same would hold true if you are a threesome that signed up and you want to have 3 separate carts, that we charge that surcharge. And it is in keeping with everything that our surrounding golf courses are charging. Thank you. And I would make a motion to accept that.
Hatfield seconds.
Thank you.
So just to be crystal clear, can you just kind of repeat the motion? Real simple.
Yes, a twosome renting 2 carts. It's a $5 surcharge for 9 holes, $10 for 18 holes. If you are a threesome or a foursome renting more than 2 carts, it is a $10 surcharge for 18 holes, $5 for 9 holes.
Okay, so it's to adopt what was presented to us with this amendment. And that
yes, sir.
And that has been seconded by Councilor Hatfield. Okay. I just want to speak in favor. I think this is a really good idea. It's overdue. I think some people take advantage, and I think that we have a capacity of about 50 carts at the course, and this puts a real tax on the carts. And so I think this is a very reasonable solution, and very much in line with what the other course is doing. So thank you both for making the motion and seconding it. Councilor Rice Hawkins.
Thank you. A question and a comment. I'm just curious if we put up any signage or discourage folks from taking out more and ask them for those who are able to do the walkable course option. And then the second is it's a nominal fee, although people fill it if they're golfing frequently. But if we could have some kind of indication of why, so because I don't want to do anything to discourage folks from social distancing while they're trying to socialize during the pandemic as well. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll be blunt about it. I mean, these are people who rolling into the course in the same car, getting out and taking 4 carts. So I don't think we're discouraging anyone. I think it's simply addressing what reality is. So, but I do appreciate your question. I think if you can walk, please do. And if you need a cart, I'm sure they'll accommodate you. But there are unfortunately some people who are taking advantage.
Follow up, if I may.
Sure.
I don't think I understood they were arriving in the same vehicle as well. I'm a little confused why there are separate cars.
They can drive to their golf ball and hit.
Separately, thank you for clarifying that.
They're fun to drive.
Councilor Fennessy, who I know always walks.
Well, I didn't today, and so I played golf somewhere else outside of the city, and they did charge us a surcharge to ride in a separate cart from people, which I did. And I think it is appropriate to include this. As Councilor Kredovic mentioned, there's just not the supply of golf carts at Beaver Meadow to be able to do this and charge the same rates that we're doing right now. So I think this is a reasonable additional charge. And I think based on what we've been told by personnel at the golf course, it's primarily people who are doing it for convenience sake, and it's not necessarily for purposes of distance.
Thank you. Councilor Kredovic.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just one more thought. We really saw this surge happen during the last heat wave, and we are expected to have a heat wave this week. So I would actually like to institute this starting tomorrow.
Councilor Hatfield, you seconded it. Are you okay with that?
Thank you.
Okay. Motion made and seconded. Everybody clear on the motion? Are we ready for the question? Madam Clerk, if you can call the roll, please.
Councilor Bouchard.
Yes.
Mayor Boulay.
Yes.
Councilor Champlin.
Yes.
Councilor Fennessy.
Yes.
Councilor Grady Sexton.
Yes.
Councilor Hatfield.
Yes.
Councilor Keach.
Yes.
Councilor Kennison.
Yes.
Councilor Kredovic.
Yes.
Councilor Matson.
Yes.
Councilor Nyan.
Yes.
Councilor Pierce.
Yes.
Councilor Rice Hawkins.
Yes.
Councilor Todd.
Yes.
And Councilor Warner.
Yes.
And with that, the motion is adopted and approved. Takes us to, we have one item for suspense. If I get a motion to take the item, to suspend the rule and take up item suspense 1.
So moved.
So moved.
Motion made
Second.
to do so. Madam Clerk, you can call the roll, please.
Councilor Bouchard.
Yes.
Mayor Boulay.
Yes.
Councilor Champlin.
Yes.
Councilor Fennessy.
Yes.
Councilor Grady Sexton.
Yes.
Councilor Hatfield.
Yes.
Councilor Keach.
Yes.
Councilor Kennison.
Yes.
Councilor Kredovic.
Yes.
Councilor Matson.
Yes.
Councilor Nyan.
Yes.
Councilor Pierce.
Yes.
Councilor Rice Hawkins.
Yes.
Councilor Todd.
Yes.
Councilor Warner.
Yes.
Okay. For consideration, we take up item suspense 1. So I'm asking your consideration. Typically, we have a period of time, a waiting period of time, before we take up appointments. This would allow for these two appointments to the Public Safety Advisory Board to be adopted this evening. You have the email and the bios and the info regarding Anna McKenna and Pedro Altagracia. The Public Safety Advisory Board is a pretty heavy lift these days, and we need additional members. There's some vacancies that need to be filled, and this would allow these two individuals to serve for the upcoming meetings and lighten the load on some of the other people who are taking that on. So I would ask for your consideration to approve these appointments this evening and allow them to get to work on the Public Safety Advisory Board.
Move approval.
Second.
Second to approve these appointments. I have Councilor Rice Hawkins.
Great, thank you. I will be supporting these nominees tonight. They look like two good individuals who could do a lot of good work on the Public Safety Advisory Board. I would like to note that for the next public opening, I'd really love to see somebody from Concord for Change included in the board. I think given the issues that we're really confronting right now, that would be a really good addition to the committee going forward. So we will make sure to have some good nominees for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Todd.
Thank you, Your Honor. You're bringing this forward in this way so that we can really help that committee. And I also wholeheartedly support the nominees, especially I can speak to Anna McKenna. I think will really bring a lot of great experience and knowledge to the committee and be a real benefit to the group. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. With that, is there any further questions or comments? Seeing none, ready for the question. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Councilor Bouchard.
Yes.
Mayor Boulay.
Yes.
Councilor Champlin.
Yes.
Councilor Fennessy.
Yes.
Councilor Grady Sexton.
Yes.
Councilor Hatfield.
Yes.
Councilor Keach.
Yes.
Councilor Kennison.
Yes.
Councilor Kretovic.
Yes.
Councilor Mattson.
Yes.
Councilor Nyan.
Yes.
Councilor Pierce.
Yes.
Councilor Rice Hawkins.
Yes.
Councilor Todd.
Yes.
And Councilor Werner.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And with that, the motion is adopted. I have no further business according to our agenda. Does anybody have anything before we move to adjourn? Okay. I'll just remind everybody we did appoint folks to a committee to come up with a draft. I promise we'll have something to the committee by the 17th. It's a week from today. And we'll work with Mr. Kennedy and others to do that. And I will look forward to seeing everyone on the 31st, Monday the 31st. Be well, be safe, and
Motion to adjourn.
love one another. Motion to adjourn. Motion made.
So moved.
Okay. Perfect. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Councilor Bouchard.
Yes.
Mayor Boulay.
Yes.
Councilor Champlin.
Indubitably, yes.
Councilor Fennessy.
Hey.
Councilor Grady Sexton.
Yes. Yes.
Councilor Hatfield.
Yes.
Councilor Keach.
Yes.
Councilor Kennison.
Yes.
Councilor Kretovic.
Yes.
Councilor Mattson.
Yes.
Councilor Nyan.
Yes.
Councilor Pierce.
Yes.
Councilor Rice Hawkins.
Yes.
Councilor Todd.
Yes.
And Councilor Werner.
Yes.
Great. Wonderful. Have a wonderful evening. Have a great week. We'll see everybody soon.
Happy dinner.
Hi, folks. Yeah, I'm going to eat.
Same here.